The billionaire stood frozen in the rain, watching a maintenance worker walk away from a check she'd spent her entire career believing could solve anything. "You think your money makes you kind?" Evan Brooks had said, his voice steady as granite. "Lady, I gave up that seat because she looked tired, not because I wanted someone to fix my life." In 30 years of building an empire, Claire Whitman had never been refused. She'd never been seen so clearly or felt so utterly small. If you want to know how a single subway seat exposed the lie at the heart of wealth and the truth about human dignity, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The Monday morning subway pulled into Chambers Street Station at exactly 7:47 a.m., 3 minutes behind schedule. Evan Brooks felt his daughter's small hand tighten around his fingers as the crowd surged forward, bodies pressing against bodies in that particular New York choreography that turned strangers into reluctant dance partners. "Daddy, it's so squished," Maya whispered, her 7-year-old voice barely audible above the screech of brakes and the automated announcement crackling through speakers that hadn't been replaced since the 90s. "I know, sweetheart. Just hold on tight." Evan maneuvered them toward the back of the car, one hand gripping the overhead rail, the other never releasing his daughter's grip. His work boots, steel-toed and scuffed from years of use, found purchase on the grimy floor. His maintenance uniform, navy blue with Metropolitan Building Services stitched in faded yellow across the back, marked him as invisible to most of the commuters buried in their phones and morning newspapers. They found a seat near the doors, Maya climbing onto his lap because there wasn't room for both of them to sit side by side. Her backpack, purple with a cartoon astronaut that she'd picked out herself last September, pressed against his chest as she settled in. "Remember what we talked about?" Evan asked, brushing a strand of dark hair from her forehead. She had her mother's hair, thick, almost black, with a slight wave that became unmanageable in humidity. Every time he looked at it, he saw Sarah. "Be good at after school. Don't argue with Marcus even when he's being dumb. Eat all my vegetables, even the green beans. The green beans are important. They taste like wet grass, Daddy. Wet grass that makes you strong." He kissed the top of her head. "Mrs. Patterson is picking you up at 3. I should be home by 6 if the boiler at the Lexington building doesn't give me trouble again." The train lurched forward, and Maya grabbed his shirt for balance. 3 more stops until her school. 2 more after that until his first job site of the day. Evan had mapped out every minute of their mornings with military precision, a necessity born not from any love of order, but from the brutal mathematics of single parenthood. The doors opened at Park Place, and a fresh wave of commuters pushed in. Evan watched them absently. The young professionals with their earbuds and expensive coffee cups, the construction workers in boots even more worn than his own, the students with backpacks heavy enough to cause future chiropractor visits, each one carrying their own invisible weight through another ordinary day. Then he saw her. She boarded last, just as the doors began their warning chime. A woman in her mid-50s, maybe early 60s, though something about her posture suggested a body that had been pushed past its limits for too long. She wore a gray coat that looked expensive but wrinkled, as if she'd slept in it. Her hair, silver-streaked and pulled back in a hasty ponot that was coming undone, framed a face that might have been beautiful once, but now carried the particular exhaustion of someone fighting battles no one else could see. No one offered her a seat. The young man in the expensive suit didn't look up from his phone. The woman with the yoga mat tucked under her arm stared straight ahead with practiced disinterest. The teenager with headphones large enough to block out the apocalypse bobbed his head to whatever beat was pounding through them. Evan was already standing before he'd consciously decided to move. His body simply responded to an equation that had never required thought. Someone tired, no seat. He had one. "Ma'am." He gestured toward the empty space, lifting Maya and settling her on his hip in one fluid motion. "Please." The woman blinked at him. Up close he could see that her eyes were red-rimmed, that her hands trembled slightly as they gripped the strap of her bag. She looked like someone who had been crying recently, or who was fighting very hard not to. "Oh, I couldn't." "It's fine, really. She's light." Evan bounced Maya gently, earning a giggle. "Go ahead." The woman hesitated for another moment, something flickering across her face that he couldn't quite read. Then she sat, her body folding into the seat, with the particular relief of someone who hadn't realized how badly they needed to rest until they finally could. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's very kind." Evan nodded once, already turning his attention back to Maya, who was trying to count how many stops were displayed on the electronic sign above the doors. He didn't notice the woman watching him. He didn't see the way her eyes tracked his movements, the casual competence with which he balanced his daughter, the gentle patience as he helped Maya sound out the station names, the complete absence of any expectation that his small act of courtesy should be noticed or rewarded. She watched him for 3 stops, until the doors opened at the station near Maya's school and he carried his daughter off the train without a backward glance. Claire Whitman had been crying since 4 a.m. Not the dignified tears of a woman who had spent 30 years building an empire and learning to control every aspect of her emotional expression. These were the ugly tears, the kind that left mascara tracks and swollen eyes, and that particular rawness in the throat that made swallowing feel like work. Her brother Daniel had called at 3:47 a.m. with news she'd been expecting for months, but somehow still wasn't prepared to receive. Their mother, Eleanor Whitman, the woman who had raised 2 children alone after their father's death, who had worked 3 jobs so Claire could go to college, who had never once complained about the sacrifices she'd made, was gone. "It was peaceful," Daniel had said, his voice breaking over the phone line. "She just went in her sleep. The nurse said she was comfortable. She never woke up." Claire had thanked him. She'd promised to handle the arrangements because that's what Claire did. She handled things. She'd built a company valued at over $4 billion on her ability to handle things that would break other people. Then she'd sat on the edge of her bed in her penthouse apartment, overlooking Central Park, and cried until her body ached. She didn't know why she'd taken the subway this morning. Her driver, Marcus, had been waiting in the garage as always. Her schedule was packed: meetings about the quarterly reports, a call with investors in Shanghai, the endless administrative machinery that kept Whitman Industries running. But she'd walked right past the black Mercedes and kept going. Down into the station she hadn't entered in probably 20 years, through the turnstile with a MetroCard she'd had to buy from the machine because she didn't own one, into a crowd of strangers who had no idea who she was or what she'd lost. The anonymity had felt like a gift. No assistants asking if she needed anything. No board members watching her for signs of weakness. No one who knew that Eleanor Whitman had died, that the woman who had given Claire everything was now simply gone. And then a man in a maintenance uniform had given her his seat, not because he knew she was grieving, not because he recognized her face from the magazine covers and business profiles, not because he wanted anything from her, a connection, a favor, a story to tell. He'd stood up because she looked tired, because he had a seat and she didn't, because helping was simply what you did. Claire sat in that seat for the rest of her ride, watching the city blur past through windows clouded with years of grime. She thought about her mother, who had never ridden in a Mercedes, who had taken the subway to her nursing job 6 days a week for 23 years, who had taught Claire that success meant nothing if you forgot where you came from. She thought about how long it had been since anyone had treated her like a person instead of a position. When she finally reached her stop, Claire walked up the stairs into the gray morning light, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Seen. Ishpa. 2 weeks later, Evan Brooks still wasn't thinking about the woman on the subway. He was thinking about the note Mrs. Patterson had sent home with Maya, written in the careful cursive of someone who had spent 4 decades working with children. Dear Mr. Brooks, I wanted to let you know that Maya mentioned she's been having some trouble sleeping lately. She told me she's worried about the dark staying forever. I thought you should know so we can work together to help her feel safe. Evan read the note 3 times, standing in the hallway of their small apartment in Washington Heights, while Maya ate her after-school snack of apple slices and peanut butter at the kitchen table. The dark staying forever. His chest tightened. It had been 18 months since Sarah's accident. 18 months since the phone call from the hospital, the drive that felt like it lasted years, the moment when a doctor whose name he'd never be able to remember told him that his wife, his partner, the love of his life, was gone. Maya had been 5 then, old enough to understand that Mommy wasn't coming back. too young to process what that meant. For the first few months, she'd asked when Sarah would return from the hospital, as if death was just a longer version of the flu. Then she'd stopped asking. Then the nightmares had started. They'd gotten better, or at least Evan had thought they'd gotten better. Maya hadn't woken up screaming in almost 2 months. She'd started smiling more, laughing at the cartoons they watched together on Saturday mornings, making friends at school who didn't know she was the girl whose mom had died. But the dark staying forever. That was Sarah's phrase. Something she'd said once, during the terrible weeks after her own mother's death, when the grief had felt bottomless. "I'm afraid the dark is going to stay forever," she'd whispered against Evan's chest. "That this feeling will never go away." He'd held her then and promised it wouldn't. He'd promised he would always be there to remind her of the light. How do you make that promise to a 7-year-old? How do you explain that the dark doesn't stay forever when you're still fumbling through it yourself? "Daddy?" Maya's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Can I have more apples?" "One more." He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, forcing his face into an expression that wouldn't frighten her. "And then homework, okay? It's just spelling. I already know all the words. Even necessary? Necessary. She drew out each letter with the exaggerated confidence of someone who had definitely practiced. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best speller in the whole class." "That's because you're brilliant." Evan walked into the kitchen and dropped a kiss on the top of her head. "Just like your mom." Maya went quiet for a moment. She always did when he mentioned Sarah. Then she looked up at him with those eyes, Sarah's eyes, brown and warm and entirely too perceptive for someone her age. "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see us?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Evan knelt down so they were at eye level, taking her small hands in his calloused ones. "I think—" He paused, searching for words that were true without being religious, comforting without being false. Sarah had been the one who was good at this. She'd always known what to say. "I think that the people we love become part of us, and that part never goes away, even when they're not here anymore." "Like how I have her hair?" "Exactly like that. And her smile, and the way you scrunch up your nose when you're thinking really hard." He demonstrated, and Maya giggled. "All those things are Mom, living inside of you." "So she's not all the way gone?" "No, baby. She's not all the way gone." Maya seemed to consider this for a long moment. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned her attention to the apple slices. Evan stayed kneeling for a few seconds longer, watching her, feeling the weight of everything he couldn't fix pressing against his ribs. He would call Mrs. Patterson tomorrow, see about getting Maya in to see the school counselor. Maybe look into those sliding scale therapy options the hospital social worker had mentioned after Sarah's death. Money was tight. It was always tight. But Maya came first. Maya always came first. The rent was due in 8 days. The boiler at the Lexington building had finally given up entirely, which meant overtime but also meant he'd be getting home later every night this week. Maya's sneakers were getting too small, and winter was coming, and he hadn't started thinking about what to do about Christmas yet. But she was okay. She was eating her apples and working on her spelling words and asking questions about her mother, which the grief book said was healthy. She was okay, and that meant he was doing something right. Evan stood up and started pulling ingredients for dinner from the refrigerator. Pasta with jarred sauce and frozen vegetables. Not exactly gourmet, but nutritious and within budget. He'd learned to cook after Sarah died, the same way he'd learned to braid hair and pick out school clothes and navigate the particular social ecosystem of second-grade friendships. Necessity was an excellent teacher. "Hey, Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" "Marcus said his mom makes homemade meatballs with their pasta. Can we have homemade meatballs sometime?" Evan thought about his work schedule, his budget, the fact that he'd never made a meatball in his life. "Sure, baby. This weekend, okay? We'll figure it out together." "Promise?" "Promise." He added, "Look up meatball recipe" to the mental list that never seemed to get shorter, and started boiling water for the pasta. Across the city, in a corner office, on the 43rd floor of a glass tower that bore her name, Claire Whitman was staring at a photograph. It was an old picture, faded and slightly cracked from years of being carried in wallets and purses and eventually stored in a box that Claire had unearthed from her mother's closet 3 days ago. The photograph showed a young woman, barely 20, with dark hair and a smile that hadn't yet learned to be guarded, holding a baby in a pink blanket. Eleanor Whitman had been beautiful once, not in the polished, maintenance-heavy way that wealth could buy, but in the way of someone who laughed easily and loved without reservation. The young woman in this photograph had no idea that her husband would die in a construction accident 6 years later. She didn't know she would spend the next 2 decades working double shifts to keep her children fed and clothed and educated. She couldn't imagine that her daughter would one day build an empire from nothing and forget how to be human somewhere along the way. Claire set the photograph down on her desk and turned to face the window. Manhattan sprawled below her, a canyon of glass and steel that she had conquered through sheer force of will. Whitman Industries owned pieces of everything she could see from this vantage point: the real estate development company that had built half the towers in Midtown, the tech subsidiary that powered apps used by millions, the investment fund that moved billions through markets on 3 continents. She was 62 years old, worth more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, and she had never felt more alone. The funeral had been 3 days ago, a small service, as Eleanor had requested. Just family and a few friends from the nursing home where she'd spent her final years. Daniel had delivered the eulogy because Claire hadn't trusted herself to speak without breaking down. She'd stood at the back of the chapel and watched her brother describe a woman Claire felt she barely knew anymore. When had she last visited her mother? Really visited, not just a quick stop between meetings with a bouquet of flowers and a check to cover whatever the insurance didn't. When had she last sat down and listened to Eleanor's stories about the old neighborhood, about the early years of her marriage, about all the small moments that had made up a life? Claire couldn't remember. That was the worst part. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been fully present with her own mother. Her phone buzzed. Jennifer, her assistant, with a reminder about the 3 p.m. meeting with the board, the quarterly numbers, the projections for next year, the endless machinery that kept demanding her attention even as she stood here grieving. She should take time off. That's what her therapist would say if she'd seen her therapist in the past 6 months. That's what Daniel had suggested gently at the reception after the funeral. Take some time, Claire. The company will survive without you for a few weeks. But would she survive? That was the question Claire couldn't answer. Work was the only thing that made sense. Work was the only place where her power meant something, where she could control outcomes and predict results and measure success in numbers that didn't lie. Without work, she was just a woman alone in a big apartment, sitting with grief that felt bottomless. Her mind drifted, as it had been doing all week, to the man on the subway. She didn't know his name. She didn't know anything about him except that he wore a maintenance uniform and carried a little girl with dark hair and had given up his seat for a stranger without a moment's hesitation. She'd thought about him more in the past 2 weeks than she'd thought about any single person in years. Not in a romantic way. She was long past the age where strangers on trains became objects of fantasy. But there was something about the simplicity of his gesture that she couldn't shake. He hadn't helped her because he wanted anything. He hadn't done it to be noticed or rewarded or praised. He'd done it because it was the right thing to do, and then he'd moved on with his life as if kindness was simply normal. When had kindness stopped being normal for Claire? She thought about the charitable foundation that bore her name, the donations she wrote off on her taxes, the galas she attended where everyone congratulated each other on their generosity while drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than most people paid for groceries in a month. Was that kindness? Or was it just another form of power, another way of controlling the narrative of who she was? The man on the subway had nothing. She'd seen his boots, worn thin. She'd noticed the patch on his uniform where something had been poorly mended. He'd held his daughter with the particular tenderness of a parent who was doing it all alone. And still, he'd given what little he had to a stranger who looked tired. Claire wanted to find him. The thought had been growing steadily since that morning, moving from idle curiosity to something more insistent. She wanted to find him and, what, thank him? That seemed insufficient. Pay him back? That seemed insulting. She wanted to understand. She wanted to know how someone with so little could give so freely, while she, who had everything, felt incapable of genuine generosity. Her phone buzzed again. Jennifer, more insistent this time. The board was waiting. Claire picked up the photograph of her mother and slid it into her desk drawer. Later. She would figure this out later. Right now, she had a company to run. But even as she walked toward the conference room, even as she arranged her face into the mask of competent authority that her board expected, she couldn't stop thinking about that moment. A crowded train, a tired woman, a man in a maintenance uniform who had stood up without being asked. She was going to find him. She didn't know why yet, but she was going to find him. The next 2 weeks passed in the blur that Evan had come to accept as the normal rhythm of his life. Work, Maya, sleep, repeat. The Lexington building boiler had been replaced with a temperamental beast that required constant attention, which meant 12-hour days and coming home to a daughter already in bed more often than he liked. Mrs. Patterson had been understanding, staying late with Maya when his schedule demanded it, accepting the extra money he pressed into her hands even when she tried to refuse. "You're doing the best you can," she'd told him last Thursday, when he'd shown up at nearly 8 o'clock with apologies spilling from his mouth. That little girl knows she's loved. The rest is just details. But details mattered. Details were what separated a childhood that worked from one that left scars. Evan knew this because he'd grown up poor too, with a father who worked himself to death and a mother who tried to fill the gaps but couldn't quite manage. He'd sworn when Maya was born that he would do better, that he would be present in ways his own father never could be. And now here he was, missing dinner 3 nights a week and hoping that love alone would be enough to bridge the distance. At least the overtime was helping with the bills. He'd managed to catch up on the electric bill, set aside a little for Maya's new sneakers, even started thinking about Christmas. Maybe a real tree this year, instead of the small artificial one they'd used since Sarah died. Maya deserved a real tree. She deserved a lot of things he couldn't afford to give her. "You're working too hard," said Victor, the super at the Lexington building, watching Evan curse at a pipe fitting that refused to cooperate. Victor was 63, had been doing building maintenance since before Evan was born, and had appointed himself something of a mentor since Evan had joined the company last year. "You keep this up, you're going to burn out before you hit 40. Can't afford to burn out." Evan gave the fitting another wrench. The pipe groaned but held. "Got rent to pay." "Got a daughter to raise too. Hard to do that from a hospital bed." "Victor, I appreciate the concern, but I know, you're fine, you're always fine." The older man handed Evan a different wrench, watching with the patient expertise of someone who had made every mistake and learned from most of them. "I was you once. Worked 60, 70 hours a week. Thought I was providing for my family. You know what my kids remember about their childhood?" Evan didn't answer. He knew where this was going. "They remember me not being there, all that money I was making, all those extra shifts. They don't remember any of that. They remember the baseball games I missed, the school plays I couldn't get to, the dinners I wasn't home for." Victor shook his head. "I'm not telling you how to live your life. Just saying, the overtime doesn't mean anything if you're not around to spend it." The fitting finally gave way, and Evan felt the small satisfaction of a problem solved. He wiped his hands on his pants and straightened up, his back protesting the movement. "Maya knows I'm doing this for her," he said. "Does she? Or does she just know Daddy's never home?" It was a fair question, one Evan didn't have a good answer to. What? 3 floors above them, in the building management office, a woman named Patricia Weiss was on the phone with a private investigator. Patricia was the executive assistant to one of the building's major investors, a silent partner who owned significant shares in 6 commercial properties across Manhattan. She'd been making calls like this all morning, trying to locate a specific maintenance worker based on a description that was frustratingly vague. Male, late 30s, dark hair, maintenance uniform for Metropolitan Building Services. He has a daughter, maybe 6 or 7 years old, dark hair as well. The investigator on the other end of the line sighed. "Ma'am, that describes about 2,000 guys in this city. He takes the subway, the Chambers Street station Monday mornings. Still pretty broad. Look, I know it's not much to go on, but this is important." Patricia glanced at her notes, instructions passed down from the very top. "Money is no object. I need a name and address, anything you can find." "I'll do what I can, But you might want to tell your employer that finding one maintenance worker in New York City is like finding a needle in a haystack the size of Brooklyn. Patricia thanked him and hung up. She'd pass along the message, but she already knew what the response would be. Claire Whitman didn't accept impossible as an answer. Claire Whitman had built her entire career on doing things other people said couldn't be done. If she wanted to find this man, she would find him. Patricia just hoped that when she did, whatever she had planned wouldn't blow up in everyone's faces. Evan didn't find out he was being watched until 2 days later, when a coworker mentioned that someone had been asking questions. Some lady, real professional type, said Marcus, who worked on the building's HVAC system and knew everyone's business. Came by yesterday asking about guys with kids. Said she was from some kind of foundation, wanted to set up scholarships or something. Scholarships? That's what she said, looking to help out single parents in blue-collar jobs. Sounds too good to be true, if you ask me. It did sound too good to be true. Evan had learned early that things that sounded too good to be true usually were. You didn't grow up poor in this city without developing a healthy suspicion of people offering help with no strings attached. What'd you tell her? Marcus shrugged. Told her I don't know, nobody fits that description. Which is technically true, since I don't know your business, and I ain't about to start sharing it with strangers. I appreciate that. Hey, we look out for each other, right? Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. But if there is some scholarship money floating around, you should probably figure out what's what. Could be legit. Stranger things have happened. Evan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. A woman asking questions, looking for single fathers with kids. It couldn't be connected to him specifically. There was no reason anyone would be searching for him, but something about it made him uneasy. He'd learned to trust his instincts. They'd kept him out of trouble more times than he could count. Right now they were telling him that something was off. But what could he do about it? He didn't know who this woman was or what she wanted. He couldn't exactly hide. He had a job to do, bills to pay, a daughter to raise. All he could do was keep his head down and hope whatever it was passed by without touching him. Claire found him on a Thursday morning. She hadn't meant to find him that way, sitting in the back of her Mercedes, being driven to a meeting she didn't want to attend, when she glanced out the window at a work crew on the sidewalk and saw him. He was different in daylight, without his daughter. Older than she'd remembered, the lines around his eyes more visible, his shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't been as obvious on the subway. He was bent over some kind of equipment, talking to an older man who seemed to be giving him instructions. "Stop the car," Claire said, the words leaving her mouth before she'd decided to speak them. "Ma'am?" "Stop the car, Marcus. Right here." The Mercedes slid to the curb, drawing a few curious glances from pedestrians. Claire sat for a moment, watching the man through the tinted window. He hadn't noticed the car. He was focused entirely on his work, his movements efficient and practiced. What was she doing? She'd spent 2 weeks trying to find this man, and now that she had no idea what to say. "Excuse me, you gave me your seat on the subway and I can't stop thinking about it," sounded unhinged. "I'm a billionaire who wants to help you," sounded worse. She thought about her mother. About Eleanor Whitman, who had never hesitated to help someone in need, who had given money they couldn't afford to spare to neighbors who were struggling, who had taught Claire that community meant looking out for each other. "You don't help people because you expect something back," Eleanor had said once, when Claire was a teenager and already calculating the transactional value of everything. "You help people because it's the right thing to do. The helping is the reward." Claire had nodded and immediately forgotten the lesson. She'd spent the next 40 years treating generosity as a strategy, charity as a tax benefit, kindness as a tool for building influence. And now here she was, watching a man who understood something she'd lost along the way. She opened the car door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Evan saw the expensive car first, a black Mercedes that probably cost more than he'd make in a decade. Then he saw the woman emerging from it, and for a moment he didn't recognize her. She was dressed differently than she'd been on the subway. Elegant now, in a way that spoke of money and power and careful attention to image. But there was something familiar about her face, about the way she held herself. The subway. The tired woman he'd given his seat to. That was her. Evan stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his work pants. Beside him, Victor went quiet, watching with the particular attention of someone who sensed trouble brewing. The woman approached them. Up close, Evan could see that she was nervous, a slight tremor in her hands, a tightness around her eyes that suggested she wasn't entirely sure what she was doing here. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm sorry to interrupt your work, but you gave me your seat on the subway a few weeks ago." Evan nodded. "I remember. I'm Claire Whitman." She extended her hand and Evan shook it automatically, noting the softness of her palm, the perfect manicure. "I've been trying to find you." "Why?" The directness seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, recalibrated. "Because I wanted to thank you. What you did, it meant more than you know." "It was just a seat." "No, it wasn't." Claire took a breath. "I was having the worst day of my life. My mother had just died and I don't know, lost. And you stood up for me without knowing any of that, without wanting anything in return." Evan didn't know what to say to that. He thought about his own mother, gone now almost 15 years, about the people who had helped him when Sarah died, expecting nothing back. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said finally. "Thank you." Claire's eyes were bright, and for a moment she looked very different from the powerful woman who had stepped out of that Mercedes. She looked human. "I wanted to ask you something. Your daughter, is she in school? Does she have everything she needs?" And there it was. The thing Evan had sensed was coming. The rich person trying to solve poverty with a checkbook, to make themselves feel better by throwing money at someone they pitied. "My daughter is fine," he said, his voice cooling slightly. I just thought if there was anything I could do. You don't know anything about my daughter." Claire stopped, hearing something in his tone that made her reconsider. "You're right. I don't. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to presume." They stood there for a moment, the silence awkward. Victor had taken a few steps back, giving them space but staying close enough to intervene if needed. "Look," Evan said finally, "I appreciate you coming to say thank you. That was kind of you. But we're fine. Maya and I, we're doing okay." "Maya, that's a beautiful name." "It was her mother's choice, before she died." "Oh." Claire's expression shifted, something like recognition passing across her features. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "How would you?" It wasn't said cruelly, just factually. "I don't need charity, Ms. Whitman. What I did on that train, I didn't do it because I wanted something. I did it because that's what you do when someone needs help. That's it." Claire nodded slowly. "I understand. I didn't mean to insult you." "You didn't." Evan softened slightly. You don't know me, and you can't fix what I'm going through by writing a check. No one can." "Then what can I do?" It was such an honest question, so unexpected, from a woman who clearly wasn't used to being told no. Evan thought about it for a moment. "Nothing," he said. "Some things can't be fixed by other people. They just have to be lived through." He picked up his tools and turned back to his work. Behind him, he heard the Mercedes door open and close, heard the car pull away from the curb. He didn't look back. Asanissim. Claire sat in the back of the car, watching the city slide past her window, feeling like she'd just failed a test she hadn't known she was taking. He'd refused her help. Not angrily, not cruelly, just simply. He didn't need charity. He was doing okay. And somehow that made her want to help him more. She thought about what he'd said. Some things can't be fixed by other people. They just have to be lived through. It was true, wasn't it? When her mother died, no amount of money or influence could have fixed that grief. She'd had to live through it, was still living through it, day by difficult day. But that wasn't what she'd been offering. She hadn't really been offering help at all. She'd been offering, what? A transaction? A way to make herself feel better about having everything while he had so little? "You think your money makes you kind?" The words he hadn't said, but that hung in the air between them anyway. She'd spent 30 years building a company, accumulating wealth, wielding power. And somewhere along the way, she'd started to believe that her success made her inherently better than people who hadn't achieved the same, that her money gave her the right, no, the responsibility, to fix people who were struggling. But he wasn't asking to be fixed. He was asking to be left alone, to raise his daughter in peace, to live his life without being turned into someone else's charity project. And she'd barged in anyway, because that's what Claire Whitman did. She saw problems and solved them. She didn't ask if people wanted to be solved. "Marcus," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am?" "What do you think makes someone kind? Really kind, not just performing kindness." Her driver was silent for a moment, considering. He'd worked for her for 15 years, long enough to know that she didn't ask questions like this often. When she did, she wanted real answers. "I think kindness is doing good things when nobody's watching," he said finally. "When you don't get credit for it. When it costs you something and you do it anyway, just because it's right." Claire nodded slowly. "That man on the subway. He didn't know who I was. He didn't expect anything from me. He just saw someone tired and gave up his seat." "Sounds about right. I've donated millions to charity. I've built foundations, funded scholarships, written checks that would make most people's eyes water. And I've never once done something that simple, that pure." Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Claire pulled out her phone and canceled her morning meetings. She wasn't ready to face the board, the investors, the endless machinery of her empire. Not today. Today, she needed to think about who she'd become and whether it was too late to change. That night, Evan sat on the edge of Maya's bed, watching her drift off to sleep. Her breathing had evened out, her face relaxed into the particular peace of childhood. He thought about the woman from the subway, Claire Whitman. Even in his exhaustion, he'd recognized the name. You didn't work in commercial real estate, even at his level, without knowing who owned what. Her company had holdings everywhere. She was worth billions. And she'd tracked him down to offer him what? Money? A job? A chance to feel like she'd done something good? He didn't blame her exactly. He'd met people like that before. Wealthy and well-meaning, unable to understand that poverty wasn't always a problem waiting to be solved. Sometimes it was just a life being lived. Sometimes the people in it weren't looking for rescue. Maya turned in her sleep, one hand reaching out as if searching for something. Evan placed his palm against hers, felt her small fingers curl around his own. This was what mattered. Not money, not status, not the approval of billionaires who couldn't understand why he'd refused their help. This moment, in this room, with this child who depended on him for everything. Sarah would have known what to say about all of this. She'd always been better with people, better at reading situations, better at navigating the complicated territory between pride and pragmatism. She would have found a way to turn Claire Whitman's offer into something that worked for everyone. But Sarah was gone, and Evan was here, doing the best he could with the tools he had. He kissed Maya's forehead, turned off the lamp, and went to the kitchen to figure out how to make meatballs. The next morning, Claire Whitman sat in her office before dawn, reading everything she could find about a maintenance worker named Evan Brooks. It wasn't hard. Once she had a name, her resources made the rest simple. His employment history, his address in Washington Heights, the newspaper clipping about his wife's accident 18 months ago. A drunk driver, a rain-slicked road, a young mother who never came home. Sarah Brooks had been a teacher, 3rd grade at a public school in the Bronx. The obituary described her as beloved by students and colleagues alike, a dedicated educator who believed every child deserved the chance to succeed. She'd been 34 years old. Claire set down the papers and stared out the window at a city just beginning to wake up. Evan Brooks wasn't a problem to be solved. He was a man who had lost his wife and was raising his daughter alone, doing honest work and asking nothing from anyone. He hadn't given up that seat because he wanted recognition. He'd done it because that's who he was. Because helping people was as natural to him as breathing. What did that say about her, that she found his simple kindness so remarkable? What did it say about the world she'd built around herself? Her phone buzzed. Jennifer, with the first reminder of the day. Board meeting in 2 hours. The quarterly numbers. The endless machinery. Claire ignored it. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she ignored the work waiting for her and let herself sit with the uncomfortable truth she'd been avoiding. She'd become someone her mother wouldn't recognize, someone who measured worth in dollars and kindness in tax deductions, someone who couldn't imagine giving without expecting something in return. She didn't want to be that person anymore. The question was, how did you become someone different when you'd spent your whole life becoming exactly who you were? Evan didn't see Claire Whitman again for almost a month. He went to work, came home, raised his daughter, lived his life. The encounter faded into memory, filed away as one of those strange things that happen sometimes in a city of 8 million people. Then one afternoon, coming home from work earlier than usual because Victor had insisted he take an afternoon off, he found a letter in his mailbox. It was handwritten on expensive stationery, addressed simply to Mr. Evan Brooks. No return address. Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology. When we spoke outside your workplace, I made assumptions about your life and what you needed. I treated your kindness as a problem to be solved, and in doing so, I reduced you to an object of charity rather than recognizing you as the remarkable person you clearly are. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that conversation, about what you said, that some things can't be fixed by other people. They just have to be lived through. It's the truest thing anyone has told me in years. My mother passed away recently. She was the last person who knew me before I became this, before I forgot how to be kind without wanting something in return. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm not offering money or help or solutions. I just wanted to say thank you, not just for the seat on the subway, but for reminding me that kindness doesn't need a reason, that it doesn't need to be earned or calculated or transactional. You gave me your seat because I looked tired, because it was the right thing to do. And in that simple act, you showed me something I'd lost sight of a long time ago. I hope you and Maya are well. I hope you know that what you're doing, raising her alone, working hard, showing up every day, is more meaningful than anything I've accomplished with all my money and power. With gratitude and respect, Claire Whitman. Evan read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. He didn't know what to make of it. Part of him was still suspicious. 30 years of wealth didn't change overnight because of one conversation with a maintenance worker. But another part of him recognized something genuine in the words, something that felt like actual growth. Maybe people could change. Maybe it wasn't too late for anyone. Or maybe this was just another rich person feeling guilty and wanting absolution. He'd seen that before too. Either way, it wasn't his problem to solve. He had dinner to make and homework to help with, and a little girl who was waiting for him to come home. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, left Claire Whitman's letter on the counter, and started teaching Maya how to shape meatballs with her hands. The meatballs turned out better than Evan expected. Maya had shaped them with the serious concentration of a surgeon, her small hands pressing the mixture of beef, breadcrumbs, and egg into imperfect spheres that somehow held together when they hit the pan. She'd eaten 3 of them at dinner, declaring them almost as good as Marcus's mom's, which Evan understood to be high praise. That night, after she'd fallen asleep with tomato sauce still faintly visible at the corner of her mouth, he sat at the kitchen table and read Claire Whitman's letter one more time. He didn't know why he kept coming back to it. The words hadn't changed, wouldn't change no matter how many times he studied them. But there was something in the handwriting, slightly uneven, as if she'd written quickly before she could talk herself out of it, that made him believe she meant what she said. Or maybe he just wanted to believe it. Maybe after 18 months of doing everything alone, he needed to believe that people could still surprise each other with genuine kindness. He folded the letter and put it in the drawer with Sarah's things. The wedding photos he couldn't look at yet. The birthday cards she'd saved from every year of Maya's life. The small box of jewelry that would someday belong to their daughter. Claire's letter didn't belong there, not really, but it felt like the right place for something he wasn't ready to throw away but didn't know what to do with. The weeks that followed settled into their familiar rhythm. Work, Maya, sleep. The Lexington building boiler behaved itself for a change, and Evan found himself getting home at reasonable hours more often than not. Maya's nightmares had faded to occasional bad dreams, manageable with a glass of water and a few minutes of sitting together in the dark. Mrs. Patterson reported that she was doing well in school, making friends, participating in class. Normal. They were becoming something like normal. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late October, Evan's phone rang while he was in the middle of fixing a stuck window on the 14th floor. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. Mr. Brooks? This is Patricia Weiss from the Whitman Foundation. I'm calling on behalf of Claire Whitman. Evan's jaw tightened. He moved away from the window, lowering his voice. I thought we were done with this. I understand your hesitation, Mr. Brooks. Ms. Whitman asked me to make very clear that this isn't charity. She's starting a new initiative, a community program focused on workforce development and family support services. She's looking for someone to help her understand what families actually need, rather than what wealthy donors assume they need. And she thinks I'm that someone. She thinks you might be willing to have a conversation. Nothing more. No obligations, no strings attached, just a conversation about whether this is something you'd be interested in being part of. Evan was quiet for a long moment. Through the window, he could see the city sprawling below, millions of people living their lives, most of them invisible to the wealthy few who shaped their world from glass towers. "I'm not a consultant," he said finally. "I fix things. That's what I do." Ms. Whitman is aware of that. She believes that's exactly why you might be valuable. You understand problems from the ground level, not the boardroom. And what would this conversation involve? Coffee, somewhere public, at your convenience. Ms. Whitman will come to you. She wants to hear your thoughts, that's all. If you decide it's not for you, she'll respect that completely. Evan thought about Maya, about the bills that never seemed to stop coming, about the future he was trying to build on a maintenance worker's salary. He thought about Sarah, who had dedicated her life to helping kids who had less than they deserved. "One conversation," he said. "That's it. If I don't like what I hear, I walk away." "Understood. Would Saturday morning work? There's a coffee shop near your apartment on 181st Street. He almost asked how she knew where he lived, then decided it didn't matter. Claire Whitman had resources. Of course she knew. "Saturday at 9, he said. "I'll be there." The coffee shop was called Elena's, a small Dominican place that had been on the corner since before Evan moved to the neighborhood. It served café con leche strong enough to wake the dead and pastries that Maya loved, but they could rarely afford. Evan arrived at 8:45, ordered his coffee, and took a seat at a table near the window where he could watch the door. Claire Whitman arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. She was dressed more casually than he'd seen her before. Dark jeans, a simple sweater, a coat that probably cost more than his rent, but didn't scream wealth the way her previous outfit had. She looked around the shop with the uncertain expression of someone who had rarely waited for anyone in her life. He raised his hand, and she spotted him. For a moment, she seemed almost nervous, hesitating at the door before crossing to his table. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." A server approached, and Claire ordered black coffee without looking at the menu. Evan noticed that she made eye contact with the young woman, said please and thank you. Small things, but things he'd learned to pay attention to. "So," he said, once they were alone again, "your assistant mentioned a program." "It's more than a program, or at least I want it to be." Claire wrapped her hands around the coffee cup the server had brought, warming herself. "After our conversation, I did a lot of thinking about the way I've tried to help people in the past and why it never felt right. Because you were doing it from up there." Evan gestured vaguely upward. "Making decisions about what people needed without asking them first." "Exactly. The Whitman Foundation has given away hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. We've built community centers and funded scholarships and written checks to every worthy cause you can imagine. And you know what difference it's made?" Evan waited. "Some. Not enough. Not nearly enough." Claire shook her head. "The problems are still there. The families are still struggling. We throw money at symptoms and pat ourselves on the back while the diseases keep spreading. So what's different about this program? I want to build something from the ground up. Something designed by people who actually live the struggles it's trying to address. Not me sitting in a boardroom deciding what poor people need, but actual community members creating solutions that work for their own communities." Evan took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim. "That sounds good in theory, but you're still the one with the money. At the end of the day, you're still the one making the final decisions." "What if I wasn't?" "What do you mean?" Claire leaned forward, her eyes intense. "What if I set up a foundation with real community control? A board made up of people from the neighborhoods we're trying to serve, with the authority to make decisions about how funds are allocated? What if my role was just to provide resources and then step back?" "You'd never do that," Evan said flatly. "Why not?" "Because that's not how people like you operate. You didn't build a billion-dollar company by giving up control. Claire was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. You're right. That is how I've operated. My whole life I've believed that success meant control. That if I wanted something done right, I had to do it myself. And now? Now I'm 62 years old and my mother just died, and I'm starting to realize that all the control in the world hasn't made me happy. It hasn't made me kind. It hasn't made me the person she raised me to be. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the table. It was the same picture Evan had seen on the news occasionally. Eleanor Whitman, the woman who had raised 2 children alone and worked her whole life so her daughter could succeed. She took the subway to work every day for 23 years, Claire said. She never complained about it, never felt like it was beneath her. She just lived her life and helped people when she could, and didn't expect anything in return. Evan looked at the photograph. The young woman in it bore little resemblance to the billionaire sitting across from him, but he could see echoes of her in the shape of the face, the determined set of the jaw. When you gave me your seat that day, Claire continued, you reminded me of her, of who I was before I became this. She gestured at herself, at the expensive clothes, at everything she represented. I don't know if I can change, but I want to try. And I thought maybe someone like you could help me figure out how. Evan sat back in his chair, processing. It was a lot to take in. A billionaire sitting in a Dominican coffee shop, asking a maintenance worker to help her become a better person. What exactly would you want me to do? I want you to be honest with me, to tell me when I'm being condescending or tone deaf or just plain wrong, to help me understand what families like yours actually need, not what I imagine they need from my penthouse apartment. And in exchange, a salary, a real one, not charity. You'd be doing work that matters, and you'd be compensated fairly for it. I already have a job. I know. This wouldn't have to be full-time, at least not at first, a few hours a week consulting on program design. If it works out, if you want to do more, we can talk about that. But I'm not asking you to give up your current work. Evan thought about Maya, about the sneakers she needed, about the Christmas he wanted to give her. He thought about Sarah, who had spent her life trying to help kids who had less than they deserved. I need to think about it, he said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. Claire stood, leaving money on the table for both their coffees. Thank you for listening. Whatever you decide, I'm grateful you gave me this chance. She walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Mr. Brooks? Evan? He looked up. For what it's worth, I meant what I wrote in that letter. What you're doing, raising your daughter alone, showing up every day, being the kind of person who gives up his seat for a stranger. That matters more than anything I've accomplished. I just wanted you to know that I see it. She left before he could respond. Evan sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching the neighborhood wake up around him. Mothers pushing strollers, old men arguing about baseball, kids on their way to weekend activities. His community, the place he'd chosen to raise his daughter. He thought about what Claire was offering. Not charity, she'd been clear about that, but partnership. A chance to actually change things, to help design programs that might make a real difference for families like his. It sounded idealistic, probably naive. Rich people didn't really give up control no matter what they said in coffee shops. And yet there had been something in her eyes, something that looked like genuine hunger, not for power or profit, but for meaning, for connection, for the chance to be more than the sum of her bank accounts. Maybe she would fail. Maybe she'd revert to type the moment things got difficult. But maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. Maybe she really did want to change. And if she was willing to try, didn't he owe it to himself, to Maya, to Sarah's memory, to at least give her the chance? He left Elena's and walked home through streets he'd known for years, thinking about the future and what it might look like if he was brave enough to reach for it. That night, after Maya was asleep, Evan called the number Patricia Weiss had given him. Tell Ms. Whitman I'll do it, he said. But I have conditions. Of course. What are they? First, I want everything in writing. Salary, responsibilities. What happens if we disagree about direction? I'm not walking into something vague and hoping for the best. Understood. Second, I'm not your spokesperson. I'm not going to stand up at galas and talk about how the billionaire saved the poor maintenance worker. If that's what this is about, we're done before we start. That's not what this is about. Third, and this is the most important one, Maya comes first, always. If my work for the foundation ever conflicts with being there for my daughter, I walk. No questions, no guilt trips, no trying to convince me otherwise. Mr. Brooks, I can assure you that Ms. Whitman would expect nothing less. In fact, I suspect that's part of why she wanted you for this in the first place. Evan was quiet for a moment. One more thing. Yes? Tell her I'm still not convinced this will work. Tell her I think there's about a 50% chance she'll get frustrated with actually listening to people instead of telling them what to do, and this whole thing will fall apart within 6 months. Patricia laughed softly. I'll tell her. Anything else? Yeah. Tell her I hope I'm wrong. The first meeting was held 2 weeks later in a community center in Washington Heights that Claire had rented for the occasion. Evan had expected a large group, foundation executives, community organizers, the usual suspects who showed up at things like this. Instead, there were only 5 people in the room: Claire, Evan, Patricia, and 2 women from the neighborhood who ran a small nonprofit focused on after-school programs for low-income kids. Their names were Rosa Gutierrez and Angela Washington. They'd been doing this work for 15 years on a shoestring budget, and they looked at Claire with the kind of skeptical patience that came from watching too many wealthy saviors come and go. So, Rosa said after the introductions were done, what makes this different from every other rich person who wanted to help us? Claire glanced at Evan, then back at Rosa. I don't know that it is different. Not yet. That's kind of the point of this meeting, to figure out if we can build something that actually works, or if I'm just another wealthy person wasting everyone's time. Angela raised an eyebrow. That's surprisingly honest. Evan suggested I try honesty. He seems to think it works better than pretending I have all the answers. Rosa looked at Evan with new interest. You're the maintenance guy, the one who gave her the seat. That's me. And you think this is worth our time? Because I've been to a lot of meetings like this, and they usually end with nothing changing. Evan considered the question carefully. I think she's serious about wanting to learn. Whether that turns into actual change, he shrugged. That depends on whether she can let go of control, and whether we're willing to push her when she doesn't. Claire absorbed the assessment without visible offense. I should also mention that Evan has full authority to call me out when I'm being condescending or making assumptions, which he's already done several times in the 2 weeks we've been working together. Several times? Patricia murmured. She wanted to start with a gala, Evan explained. I told her that if we announced this program at a fancy party where poor people served hors d'oeuvres to rich donors, we'd be dead on arrival. What did she say? She said I was probably right, canceled the gala, and asked what I thought we should do instead. Rosa and Angela exchanged a look. Something shifted in the room, a slight relaxation of the tension that had been present since they walked in. Okay, Angela said. I'm interested. What exactly are you proposing? For the next 3 hours, they talked, not about programs or budgets or organizational structures, but about needs. What families in the neighborhood actually struggled with. What services already existed and why they weren't enough. What gaps no one was addressing because they didn't fit neatly into foundation grant categories. Claire listened more than she talked. When she did speak, it was usually to ask clarifying questions, to probe deeper into something Rosa or Angela had mentioned. Evan watched her carefully, waiting for the moment when the old habits would reassert themselves, when she'd start making pronouncements about what needed to be done. It didn't happen, or at least not the way he'd expected. At one point, Angela mentioned the difficulty of getting kids to after-school programs when their parents worked multiple jobs and couldn't pick them up. What about transportation? Claire asked. Could we provide shuttles? That's been tried, Rosa said. The logistics are a nightmare. Different schools let out at different times. Kids live all over the neighborhood. But what if we brought the programs to them instead? Set up satellite locations in apartment buildings, churches, community spaces, wherever kids already are after school. Angela started to dismiss the idea, then stopped. Actually, that's not terrible. We've talked about something like that before, but we never had the resources to make it work. What would you need? Staff, mainly. People who already have relationships in those buildings, who the families trust. You can't just parachute in strangers and expect parents to hand over their kids. Claire nodded slowly, and Evan could see her processing the information, fitting it into some larger picture she was building in her mind. But she didn't announce a solution. She just kept asking questions. By the time they finished, Rosa and Angela had agreed to participate in a pilot program. Small scale, focused on 3 buildings in the neighborhood, staffed by people they would help recruit from the community. Claire would provide funding and administrative support, but the operational decisions would be made by a committee that included Rosa, Angela, and other community members. "This might actually work," Angela said, as they were gathering their things to leave. "I can't believe I'm saying that, but this might actually work." "Don't get too excited yet," Evan said. "The hard part comes when things go wrong and everyone wants to start pointing fingers." Claire caught his eye. "Is that another one of your honesty moments?" "Just keeping expectations realistic." "I appreciate that." She smiled, and for a moment she looked almost young. "I appreciate all of it, even the parts that make me uncomfortable." The pilot program launched 6 weeks later, on a cold December morning that made Evan's bones ache. He stood in the lobby of one of the participating buildings, a 20-story tower on 175th Street, where half the residents were below the poverty line, watching as children filtered in from school, greeted by staff members who knew their names and their families. Maya was with him. She'd asked to come, curious about what Daddy was doing when he wasn't fixing broken things, and Claire had suggested she might enjoy seeing the program in action. "Is this where you work now?" Maya asked, watching a group of kids settle around a table for homework help. "Sort of. I'm helping some people figure out how to make it work better." "Like how you fix the boilers?" Evan smiled. "Kind of. Except instead of machines, we're trying to fix systems, ways of doing things that aren't working the way they should." Maya considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old confronting a philosophical problem. "That sounds harder than boilers." "It is. But it's important." Claire appeared at his elbow, having finished a conversation with one of the site coordinators. "Maya, right? I've heard a lot about you." Maya looked up at her with frank curiosity. "You're the lady from the subway." "That's right. Your dad was very kind to me that day." "He's kind to everyone. Mom said it's because he has a big heart, even though hearts are all the same size, really." Claire's expression softened. "Your mom sounds like she was very smart." "She was. She was a teacher." Maya said it with the particular pride of a child who has been told this many times. "She helped kids learn to read." "That's wonderful. Reading is one of the most important things anyone can learn." "Dad reads to me every night. We're doing Charlotte's Web right now. It's sad, but also good." "That was one of my favorites when I was your age." Evan watched the exchange, feeling something shift in his chest. Claire wasn't performing kindness for an audience. She was just talking to his daughter. Like a normal person. Like someone who remembered what it was like to be a child reading Charlotte's Web and feeling sad and good at the same time. Maybe she really was changing. Maybe people could. The first real crisis came 3 weeks into the pilot, when a conflict erupted between 2 of the site coordinators about how to handle discipline issues. One believed in strict consequences for misbehavior. The other advocated for restorative approaches that focused on understanding why kids acted out. The disagreement escalated quickly, with both coordinators threatening to quit if the other's approach was adopted. Rosa and Angela were caught in the middle, trying to mediate but making little progress. Claire's instinct, Evan knew, would be to step in and make a decision. To resolve the conflict through executive authority, the way she'd resolved thousands of business disputes over the years. Instead, she called Evan. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. "They're both good at their jobs. We can't afford to lose either of them. But they can't work together if they fundamentally disagree about approach." "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell them both to grow up and figure it out. But I'm guessing that's not the right answer." "Probably not." "So what is?" Evan thought about it for a moment. "You remember what you said at that first meeting about wanting to build something designed by the community, not dictated from above?" "Yes. This is what that looks like in practice. It's messy. People disagree. There's no clean solution that makes everyone happy. That doesn't help me figure out what to do. Maybe that's the point. Maybe your job isn't to figure out what to do. Maybe it's to create a space where the people involved can figure it out themselves. Claire was quiet for a long moment. You're saying I should bring them together and facilitate a conversation instead of making a decision. I'm saying you should try. And if it doesn't work, you should try something else. But jumping in to fix it yourself, that's the old pattern. That's what you're trying to change. More silence. Then, this is really hard. Yeah, it is. I don't like it. I know. But you think it's the right approach. I think it's worth trying, and I think if you make the decision for them, you'll solve this problem, but create a bigger one. You'll teach everyone that when things get tough, they should just wait for the rich lady to tell them what to do. Claire laughed, a short, surprised sound. No one talks to me like this, you know. Employees, board members, even my brother, they all tiptoe around what they really think. Is that why you wanted me for this job? Partly. Also because you genuinely seem to give a damn about whether this works. Most people I work with are motivated by money or power or fear. You're motivated by, I don't know, something else. Maya, Evan said simply. I'm motivated by Maya, by the world she's going to grow up in, by whether that world is going to be a place where someone like her has a real chance. That's a good motivation. It's the only one that matters. The meeting with the two coordinators was not easy. There were raised voices and accusations and a moment when one of them actually walked toward the door. But Claire sat with it. She asked questions. She acknowledged both perspectives. She refused to take sides or impose a solution. Slowly, painfully, the coordinators began to hear each other. Not agree. That would take longer if it happened at all, but hear. By the end of the 3-hour session, they'd agreed to a compromise. A tiered approach that started with restorative practices and escalated to consequences only when those didn't work. It wasn't perfect, but it was something they'd built together, rather than something imposed from above. That was exhausting, Claire said afterward, slumped in a chair in the empty community center. I felt useless the whole time, like I was just sitting there while they fought. That's because you were doing something new, Evan said. You were holding space instead of taking charge. It's harder than it looks. Holding space. She repeated the phrase like she was tasting it. Is that what it's called? It's what Sarah used to call it. When she talked about her classroom, she said, good teachers don't just teach, they create conditions where learning can happen. Then they step back and let the kids figure things out for themselves. Claire looked at him with something like wonder. She really was special, wasn't she? Your wife. She was. You miss her. It wasn't a question, but Evan answered anyway. Every day? But it's different now. Less like drowning, more like carrying something heavy. You get used to the weight. Does it ever get lighter? Sometimes, when Maya laughs at something or does something that reminds me of her. When I see that Sarah's still here, in our daughter, even though she's gone. Claire nodded slowly. My mother used to say that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form, becomes something you carry instead of something you share. That sounds about right. They sat in silence for a while. Two people who had come from very different worlds and found themselves, improbably, in the same place. Thank you, Claire said finally, for pushing me to try this, for not letting me take the easy way out. That's what you're paying me for. It's more than that. You're helping me become someone better, someone my mother might actually be proud of. Evan didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and started gathering his things. Outside the window, the city was settling into its evening rhythm, lights coming on in apartment windows, people heading home from work, the endless dance of a place that never truly slept. Same time next week? Claire asked. Same time next week. And you should probably expect more crises. That's how these things work. I'm starting to realize that. Welcome to community work. It's nothing like running a corporation. No, Claire said, and there was something almost like relief in her voice. It's not. And I think that might be exactly what I needed. Christmas came and went. Evan managed to get Maya a real tree, small, slightly lopsided, but real, and she decorated it with the concentrated intensity of an artist working on her masterpiece. He found money for new sneakers and a few toys she'd been wanting, plus a book about space that she read 3 times in the first week. On Christmas morning, after the presents were opened and the cinnamon rolls were eaten, Maya asked him a question that stopped him cold. "Daddy, is the lady from the subway your friend now?" Evan paused in the middle of cleaning up wrapping paper. "Miss Whitman? I guess so. We work together." "She's nice. I liked talking to her when we went to that building with all the kids." "She is nice." Evan realized as he said it that it was true. Somewhere over the past 2 months, Claire Whitman had stopped being the billionaire who wanted to fix him and become something else. A colleague, a collaborator, maybe even, yes, a friend. "Do you think she's lonely?" Maya asked. "Why do you ask that?" "She looked lonely when I talked to her, like she wanted to keep talking but didn't know how." Evan sat down next to his daughter, struck once again by her perceptiveness. Sarah's perceptiveness, living on in this small, fierce person. "I think she might be," he said honestly. "She has a lot of money, but that's not the same as having people who care about you. We could invite her for Christmas next year. If she's lonely, then she wouldn't have to be alone." "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart. We'll see." Maya nodded, satisfied, and returned her attention to the space book. Evan watched her for a moment, thinking about loneliness and connection and the strange paths that brought people together. A billionaire and a maintenance worker, a grieving daughter and a grieving widow. 2 people who had nothing in common except a single moment of kindness on a crowded subway train. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if Claire's program would succeed or fail, if their unlikely partnership would last, if any of this was leading somewhere meaningful or just filling time. But he knew this. He'd given up his seat for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. And that one small choice, rippling outward in ways he never could have predicted, had changed both their lives. Maybe that was how the world changed, not through grand gestures or billion-dollar initiatives, but through simple acts of kindness, accumulating slowly until they reached a tipping point. Or maybe he was just being naive. Maybe the rich would always protect the rich, and the poor would always struggle. And all the community programs in the world couldn't change the fundamental inequalities built into the system. He didn't know. He couldn't know. But he could show up tomorrow and do the work. He could be honest when Claire needed to hear hard truths. He could help build something that might, just might, make a difference for families like his. And he could raise Maya to be the kind of person who noticed when someone was lonely, who thought to invite strangers to Christmas dinner, who understood that kindness wasn't weakness, it was strength. That was enough for now. That had to be enough. The new year arrived with a snowstorm that blanketed the city in white and shut down the subway for 3 days. Evan and Maya built a snowman in the small park near their apartment, gave it a scarf Sarah had knitted and a hat that had been sitting in the closet for years. They named it Mr. Frosty and visited it every day until it melted. The pilot program continued to expand. 2 more buildings joined in January, and Rosa and Angela began training additional coordinators recruited from the community. The discipline conflict had resolved itself, more or less. The tiered approach was working better than either original method. And Claire was learning to trust the process, to let solutions emerge rather than imposing them. At their weekly meeting in late February, she showed Evan a report from the program's first 3 months. Test scores were up. Attendance at the after-school programs had exceeded projections. Parents were reporting that their children seemed happier, more engaged, more hopeful about the future. "It's working," Claire said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, but it's actually working." "Early days," Evan cautioned. 3 months doesn't prove anything. But it suggests something. It suggests that this approach, building from the ground up, letting the community lead, might actually be effective. It suggests that. We'll need years of data before we can say more than that. Claire smiled. "You're still keeping my expectations realistic." "Someone has to." "I appreciate it, even when it's annoying." Evan leaned back in his chair, studying her. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. Less polished somehow, but also more real. The expensive clothes had been replaced by simpler things. The perfect hair had relaxed into something more natural. She looked like someone who had been doing work that mattered, rather than someone performing success for an audience. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "What does your board think about all this? The billion-dollar corporation you're still running? How do they feel about their CEO spending so much time on a community program in Washington Heights? Claire's expression flickered, a brief shadow crossing her face. They think I've lost my mind, or that I'm having some kind of late-life crisis. A few of them have suggested politely that I might want to focus more on shareholder value and less on social experiments. And I've told them, politely, that I built this company from nothing and I'll run it however I see fit. That's going to cause problems. Probably, she shrugged. But I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about how some things can't be fixed by other people. They just have to be lived through. Evan waited. I think I've been trying to fix myself by controlling everything around me. The company, the foundation, this program. They've all been ways of avoiding the thing I actually needed to face. Which is who I want to be. Not what I want to accomplish, but who I want to be when I'm not accomplishing anything, when there's no one watching, when no one cares what Claire Whitman thinks or wants. And who is that? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city below. I'm still figuring it out, but I think it's someone who gives up their seat on the subway, someone who helps without needing credit. Someone who knows that kindness isn't a strategy, it's just how you live. Evan felt something shift in his chest, not admiration exactly, but something close to it. This woman had spent her life building an empire, and here she was, in a community center in Washington Heights, trying to learn how to be a decent person. That's a good goal, he said quietly. Is it? Sometimes it feels like too little too late. I'm 62 years old. I've spent 40 years becoming someone my mother would barely recognize. Can you really change that much, this late in life? I don't know, Evan admitted, but I think trying matters. Even if you don't get all the way there, the trying matters. Claire nodded slowly. Sarah said something like that, didn't she, in one of the things you told me about her? She said that character isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and doing a little better than you did before. She was wise. She was human. She made mistakes. She lost her temper. She had days when she wanted to give up. But she kept showing up. That's what I remember most about her. And that's what you're teaching Maya? Evan thought about his daughter, her perceptiveness, her kindness, her stubborn insistence on seeing the good in people. I'm trying. I'm not sure how well it's working. From what I've seen, it's working beautifully. Claire stood, gathering her things. I should go. Board meeting this afternoon, and I need to prepare for the inevitable arguments about mission drift and stakeholder priorities. Have fun with that. Somehow I doubt I will, but thank you for everything, for being honest with me, even when I didn't want to hear it, for believing this could work, even when I wasn't sure myself. Evan stood and shook her hand. It had become their ritual, a formal gesture that acknowledged the professional nature of their relationship while leaving room for the friendship that had grown alongside it. Same time next week, he said. Same time next week. She left, and Evan sat back down in the empty community center, thinking about change and transformation and whether it was ever too late to become someone better. Outside, the February sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the buildings in shades of gold and orange. The city continued its endless dance, people coming and going, struggling and surviving, reaching for dreams that seemed impossibly far away. And somewhere in that city, a billionaire was learning to give without taking, and a maintenance worker was learning that his small acts of kindness might change the world. It wasn't a fairy tale. There would be more crises, more conflicts, more moments when it all seemed like it might fall apart. The work was just beginning, and the hardest parts were still ahead. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. The board meeting went exactly as Claire had predicted, which was to say badly. She sat at the head of the long conference table on the 43rd floor, listening to men in expensive suits explain why her priorities were misaligned with shareholder interests. Richard Thornton, the lead independent director, had prepared a presentation complete with charts showing the correlation between her increased community involvement and the stock's underperformance relative to competitors. I'm not suggesting you abandon your philanthropic activities entirely, Richard said, his tone carrying the particular condescension of someone who believed himself to be speaking to a child. But the market is watching. Investors are asking questions. They want to know that Whitman Industries is still being led by someone focused on growth, not social experiments. Claire felt the familiar surge of anger that came whenever someone questioned her judgment. 40 years of building this company, and they still treated her like she needed supervision. She could fire Richard. She could fire all of them. She had the voting shares to do whatever she wanted. But then she thought about Evan, about the conversations they'd had over the past 6 months, about holding space instead of taking charge, about letting solutions emerge rather than imposing them. Richard, she said, keeping her voice calm, I appreciate your concerns, and you're right that the stock has underperformed this quarter, but I'd like to point out that we've also seen unprecedented engagement scores from our employees, lower turnover than any time in the past decade, and positive media coverage that money can't buy. Those are soft metrics, another board member interjected. They don't translate to earnings per share. Not directly, not immediately, but they translate to a company that people want to work for and buy from. That's the foundation of long-term value creation. The arguments continued for another hour. Claire made her case, listened to theirs, and ultimately arrived at a compromise that satisfied no one completely but avoided the open warfare that had seemed inevitable at the meeting's start. She agreed to spend 2 additional days per week on corporate matters. They agreed to stop questioning her community work in public forums. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. After the board members filed out, Claire sat alone in the conference room, staring at Richard's chart still displayed on the screen. The graphs showed declining stock prices and market share erosion and all the metrics that were supposed to define success. She thought about her mother, who had never owned a single share of stock in her life, who had measured success in children fed and bills paid and small kindnesses extended to neighbors who needed them. What would Eleanor think of this room? Of these arguments about shareholder value and market positioning? Would she recognize her daughter in this woman who had traded everything for numbers on a screen? Claire's phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. The March expansion planning meeting is confirmed for next Wednesday. Rosa and Angela will be there, plus representatives from 3 new buildings. The community program? The thing that actually mattered. Claire turned off the projector, gathered her things, and left the conference room without looking back at the charts. Some things couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. Some value couldn't be captured in earnings per share. She was learning to be okay with that. Slowly, painfully, but learning. 3 days later, Evan received a phone call that changed everything. He was at work, halfway through repairing a broken elevator motor on the 12th floor, when his phone buzzed with a call from Maya's school. His heart stopped the way it always did when that number appeared. The primitive fear of every parent that something had happened to their child. Mr. Brooks? This is Principal Hernandez. Maya is fine, she added quickly, and Evan's heart resumed beating. But we need you to come in. There's been an incident. What kind of incident? It's better if we discuss it in person. Can you be here within the hour? Evan looked at the motor, half disassembled, tools scattered across the floor. Victor would cover for him. Victor always covered for him. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He made it in 15, walking through the school's front doors with his work uniform still on and grease still under his fingernails. The secretary directed him to the principal's office, where Principal Hernandez was waiting with Maya and another woman Evan didn't recognize. Maya was sitting in one of the chairs, her face blotchy from crying. When she saw Evan, she launched herself across the room and into his arms. Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong. I promise I didn't do anything wrong. Hey. He knelt down, taking her face in his hands. It's okay. Whatever happened, we'll figure it out. Just breathe. Principal Hernandez gestured for him to sit. The other woman introduced herself as Dr. Patterson from Child Protective Services, and Evan felt the floor drop out from under him. Mr. Brooks, the principal began, we received a report this morning from an anonymous source alleging that Maya is being neglected, that you're leaving her alone for extended periods while you work multiple jobs. That's not true. Evan's voice came out harder than he intended. She's never alone. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, watches her after school until I get home. She's supervised every minute. We're required to investigate all reports, Dr. Patterson said, her tone carefully neutral. This is standard procedure. No one is accusing you of anything. Then why is my daughter crying in the principal's office? Why was she pulled out of class to answer questions about her home life? The interview was brief and conducted with sensitivity. We just needed to verify basic information about her daily routine. Evan looked at Maya, who was pressed against his side, her small body trembling. Whatever the interview had been, it hadn't felt brief or sensitive to her. "Who filed the report?" he asked. "It was anonymous. We're not able to disclose. Someone called Child Protective Services on me, on my family. I have a right to know who." "The law protects the identity of reporters, Mr. Brooks. That's to encourage people to come forward when they have genuine concerns." "And do you have genuine concerns?" Dr. Patterson and Principal Hernandez exchanged a look. "Based on our preliminary investigation, Maya appears to be healthy, well cared for, and happy. The neighbors we contacted spoke highly of your involvement as a father, but we're required to complete a full assessment. Someone will need to visit your home within the next week." "Fine. Visit my home, look through my refrigerator, talk to everyone I know. But I want you to understand something." Evan kept his voice steady with effort. "I have dedicated every moment of my life for the past 2 years to raising my daughter. She is the most important thing in my world, and whoever filed this report did it to hurt her, not to help her. Mr. Brooks, she's 7 years old, she lost her mother, and now she's going to go home tonight thinking that someone might take her away from me. Do you understand what that does to a child?" The room was silent. Maya's hand found his and squeezed tightly. "We'll complete our assessment as quickly as possible," Dr. Patterson said finally. "If everything checks out, which I expect it will, this will be closed, and nothing more will come of it. And my daughter, what am I supposed to tell her?" "Tell her the truth, that some adults got confused and they asked some questions, and everything is going to be okay." Evan wanted to argue more, wanted to demand answers about who had done this and why. But Maya was watching him, taking her cues from his reaction, and he couldn't fall apart in front of her. "We're done here," he said, standing up. "Maya, get your backpack. We're going home." The walk home was quiet. Maya held his hand the entire way, something she'd stopped doing in public because she was too big for that now. Evan didn't try to make conversation. He just let her process whatever she needed to process, holding space the way Sarah used to do. When they got to the apartment, he made her a snack, apple slices and peanut butter, her favorite, and sat with her at the kitchen table. "Daddy?" she said finally. "Yes, sweetheart? Why did those people ask me questions about you?" He thought about the answer carefully. Maya was smart. She'd know if he was lying or minimizing. "Because someone told them they were worried about you. They wanted to make sure you were safe and happy." "But I am safe and happy." "I know you are. And that's what you told them, right?" Maya nodded. "I told them about Mrs. Patterson and how she makes me homework snacks, and about how you read to me every night, and about the meatballs." Her voice wobbled. "But they kept asking more questions, and I got scared. I thought they were going to take me away." Evan pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her small body. "No one is going to take you away from me. I promise. This was just a mistake. Some adults got confused, like the lady said." "But why would anyone tell them you were a bad daddy? You're the best daddy." "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people do things that don't make sense." He held her until her breathing evened out, until the trembling stopped. Then he sent her to her room to do her homework while he went to the kitchen and called Claire. "Someone filed a CPS report on me," he said without preamble. "Anonymous, claiming I'm neglecting Maya." "What?" Claire's voice sharpened. "That's absurd. You're the most attentive father I've ever met." "I know, but someone wanted to cause problems, and they knew exactly how to do it. Go after my daughter." "Do you have any idea who?" Evan had been thinking about this since the moment he'd heard the words Child Protective Services. Who would want to hurt him? Who would know enough about his life to craft an accusation that seemed plausible? "The only thing that's changed in my life recently is the work I'm doing with you," he said slowly. "The community program. The visibility that's come with it." "You think someone connected to the program?" "No. Rosa and Angela have no reason to hurt me. The community members we've been working with, they know me. They know Maya. This feels like it came from somewhere else." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Richard Thornton, the board." "What?" I told you about the board meeting, about how they're unhappy with my community involvement. What if one of them decided to attack the program by attacking you? That's... Evan stopped. It wasn't impossible. In his experience, wealthy people rarely fought their battles directly. They used lawyers and investigators and anonymous reports. They attacked through systems designed to help and turned them into weapons. I don't know, he said finally. I don't have any proof of anything. Let me look into it. I have resources. If someone on my board did this, I will find out. Claire, I mean it. You're part of this program because I asked you to be. If that involvement has put your family at risk, I need to know, and I need to fix it. Evan thought about what she was offering. He'd spent his whole life solving problems on his own, not trusting anyone else to have his back. But this was different. This was bigger than him. Okay, he said. Look into it, but be careful. If you're right about the board, they're not going to appreciate you investigating them. They're going to appreciate it even less when I fire them. Don't do anything you can't undo. Not until we know for sure. Always keeping my expectations realistic. Someone has to. He hung up and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in his hands. Outside, the city continued its endless noise, traffic, construction, the sounds of 8 million people living their lives. Inside, his daughter was doing her homework, trying to pretend that her world hadn't just been shaken. This was supposed to be a good thing. Working with Claire, building something that helped families like his, it was supposed to make their lives better, not put them in danger. But nothing was ever simple. Nothing was ever safe. The world had a way of punishing you for hoping too much. All he could do now was wait and protect Maya, and hope that Claire found answers before things got worse. The answers came faster than either of them expected. 3 days after the CPS report, Claire called Evan to a meeting at a location he didn't recognize, an office in Midtown that belonged to a private investigation firm she'd apparently had on retainer for years. I don't usually use them for this kind of thing, she explained as they sat in a conference room surrounded by boxes of documents. Corporate espionage, background checks, due diligence on acquisition targets. But when I told them what I needed, they were thorough. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were phone records, email printouts, and a timeline of communications that traced back to a familiar name. Richard Thornton. He didn't make the call himself, Claire said. He's too smart for that. But he talked to his assistant, who talked to a lawyer, who talked to a consultant who specializes in reputation management. That consultant made the call to CPS. Evan stared at the documents, feeling a cold fury building in his chest. He tried to take my daughter away because he didn't like how you were spending your time. He tried to create a scandal that would force me to distance myself from the program. From you. He figured if you were under investigation, I'd have no choice but to cut ties. And Maya was just collateral damage. To someone like Richard, everyone is collateral damage. He doesn't see people. He sees obstacles and opportunities. Evan closed the folder. His hands were shaking, and he pressed them flat against the table to hide it. What are you going to do? I'm going to destroy him. The words were spoken calmly, without emotion, but Evan could see something burning behind Claire's eyes. Something that reminded him of the woman who had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. How? Richard has been on my board for 15 years. In that time, he's made enemies. He's cut corners. He's done things that wouldn't survive public scrutiny. Claire's smile was thin and sharp. My investigators found records. Nothing dramatic, no crimes, no obvious scandals. But enough. Enough to make other board members nervous about their association with him. Enough to quietly push him out without the mess of a public confrontation. And if that doesn't work, then I go public. I tell the world that a board member at my company targeted the family of a community volunteer because he didn't approve of how I was spending my charitable dollars. I let the media tell that story and watch Richard try to explain his way out of it. Evan considered this. It was strategic, calculated, the kind of corporate maneuvering he'd never had access to but had seen play out from the sidelines his whole life. The powerful protecting their interests through systems designed to crush anyone who got in their way. But this time, the power was being used to protect him, to protect Maya. Will it work? He asked. Almost certainly. Richard has survived this long by being smart, not by being liked. When the other board members see the evidence, and more importantly, when they see that I'm willing to go nuclear if necessary, they'll abandon him in a heartbeat. And Maya? The CPS investigation? I've already spoken to the head of the agency, explained the situation. They're going to expedite the home visit, find nothing concerning, and close the case. It'll be over by the end of the week. Evan felt the tension in his chest begin to ease just slightly. You didn't have to do this. Get involved, use your resources. This was my problem. It was my problem too. Richard attacked you because of your connection to me. That makes it my responsibility. That's not how I see it. How do you see it? He thought about the question, about the past 6 months working side by side with this woman who had started as a stranger offering unwanted charity and become something else entirely. I see it as partnership, he said finally. You had my back. I would have done the same for you. Claire's expression softened. Would you? Yes. Not with private investigators and corporate maneuvering. I don't have access to any of that. But I would have shown up. I would have told the truth. I would have done whatever I could to help. That might be worth more than all the investigators in the world. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had happened and what had been averted settling over them. There's something else, Claire said finally. Something I've been thinking about. What? The board, the company, all of it. She gestured vaguely, encompassing the investigation files, the Midtown office, the empire she'd built. I've spent my whole life accumulating power so that moments like this wouldn't happen, so that no one could touch me or the things I cared about. And it didn't work. Richard is on my board because I put him there. The systems I built. They created the vulnerabilities that almost hurt your family. All that power, and I couldn't protect the things that actually matter. Evan waited. He'd learned by now that Claire processed things by talking them through, that she needed to articulate her thoughts before she could understand them. I'm thinking about stepping back, she said. Not entirely, not yet, but starting the transition to someone else, someone who can run the company without me hovering over every decision. That's a big change. It is, and I'm not sure I'm ready for it, but I'm starting to realize that the most important work I'm doing isn't in boardrooms or quarterly reports. It's in community centers and coffee shops and conversations with people like you. That's not going to make your shareholders happy. Probably not. But I'm 62 years old and my mother just died, and I've spent 40 years building something that almost destroyed an innocent family because one man didn't like how I was spending my time. She shook her head. At some point, you have to ask yourself what it was all for, what any of it was for. And what's your answer? Claire looked at him with something like wonder in her eyes. I'm still figuring that out, but I think it has something to do with that seat on the subway, with the way you stood up without being asked, without expecting anything in return. That one small act of kindness. It's the only thing in my life recently that felt completely real. It was just a seat. No, it wasn't. It was a choice about who you wanted to be in that moment, regardless of what anyone else thought or whether you'd be rewarded. She paused. I want to learn to make choices like that, not calculated decisions about shareholder value and market positioning, real choices about kindness and humanity and what actually matters. Evan didn't know what to say to that. It was too big, too philosophical, for someone who had spent his life dealing with concrete problems, broken boilers and past due bills and a daughter who needed him to show up every single day. But he understood what she was reaching for. He'd felt it himself, in the dark months after Sarah died, when nothing made sense, and the only thing that kept him going was the simple necessity of being there for Maya. That sounds like a good goal, he said finally. Is it enough? Just trying to be better? It's all any of us can do. Claire nodded slowly, seeming to accept this. Then she gathered the investigation files and slid them back into her briefcase. I'll take care of Richard. You take care of Maya. And when this is all over, she hesitated. When this is all over, I think we should expand the program. More buildings, more neighborhoods, real scale. You want to do more? After what just happened? I want to do more because of what just happened. Richard attacked us because he was afraid of what we're building. That means it matters. That means it's working. Evan thought about the past few days. The fear in Maya's eyes when she'd been pulled out of class, the cold rage he'd felt when he understood what had been done to his family. He thought about all the reasons to step back, to protect what he had, to stop taking risks that put his daughter in danger. But he also thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she were here. She'd always believed that fear was a reason to push forward, not to retreat, that the most important things were worth fighting for, even when the fighting was hard. "Okay," he said, "let's expand." The CPS investigation closed 4 days later, exactly as Claire had predicted. The home visit was brief and professional. A social worker who took notes on Maya's room, asked a few questions about their daily routine, and left with a handshake and an apology for any distress the process had caused. Maya recovered faster than Evan expected. Children were resilient that way, bouncing back from things that would have broken adults. Within a week, she'd stopped asking questions about the people who had come to school, stopped watching him with that worried expression that made his heart ache. Richard Thornton's departure from the board was announced a month later. The press release cited personal reasons and new opportunities, the standard language for a forced exit. Claire didn't comment publicly, and neither did Richard. But everyone in corporate New York understood what had happened, even if they didn't know the details. The community program expanded through the spring, adding 6 new buildings and 3 additional neighborhoods. Rosa and Angela hired more coordinators, trained more staff, developed systems that could scale without losing the personal touch that made the program work. Evan's role evolved too. He was no longer just the honest voice keeping Claire grounded. He'd become a true partner in the work, helping to design new initiatives and troubleshoot problems and build relationships with community members who didn't trust wealthy outsiders. Victor teased him about it at work. "Look at you running with the big dogs now. Next thing you know, you'll be wearing suits and drinking fancy coffee." "I still fix boilers, Victor." "For how long?" "Word is the Whitman Foundation is about to become a much bigger deal." "You gonna stick around here when you could be saving the world?" It was a fair question. The work with Claire was consuming more and more of his time, pulling him away from the maintenance jobs that had been his livelihood for years. He'd started turning down overtime, coming in later, leaving earlier. His bosses hadn't complained yet. His work was good, and he was reliable. But he could feel the tension building. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm taking it one day at a time." "That's smart. Don't let the rich lady change who you are." "Is that what you think is happening?" Victor was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think you're still the same guy who showed up here 2 years ago, trying to hold it together after losing his wife. Maybe a little more confident, maybe a little less scared, but the same guy." "Thanks, Victor. Don't mention it. Now get back to work before the boss comes by and thinks we're slacking." Maya's 8th birthday fell on a Saturday in early May, and Evan threw her the first real party she'd had since Sarah died. 10 kids from her class, a cake shaped like a rocket ship because she was obsessed with space now, and a backyard full of balloons and streamers and the particular chaos that came with a dozen 8-year-olds hopped up on sugar. Claire came too. Not as a guest of honor, not as the billionaire benefactor, just as a friend who brought a gift and helped clean up afterward. "She's amazing," Claire said, watching Maya lead her friends through an elaborate game she'd invented involving aliens and astronauts. "You've done such a good job with her." "She's done a good job with herself. I just try to stay out of the way." "That's not true and you know it." Evan shrugged. "Maybe, but I also know that I can't take credit for who she is. She came into the world with her own personality, her own strengths. All I can do is try not to mess it up." That sounds like something Sarah would have said. It is. Almost exactly. They watched Maya for a while longer, 2 unlikely friends who had found each other through a moment of random kindness and built something neither of them had expected. "I've been thinking," Claire said finally, "about what comes next. For the program, for the foundation, for everything. And I'm going to step back from Whitman Industries. Not completely. I'll stay on as chair emeritus, keep my voting shares, maintain some oversight, but I'm handing over day-to-day operations to someone else." Evan turned to look at her. "That's a big decision." "It is. I've been wrestling with it for months, but watching Maya today, watching you with her, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? That life is short. That the things we think are important usually aren't. That the legacy we leave isn't measured in stock prices or market share, but in the people we've helped and the kindness we've shown. Did my daughter tell you that? Because it sounds like something she'd say. Claire laughed. No, but I suspect she could have. She's wiser than most adults I know. The party wound down as the afternoon turned to evening. Parents came to collect their children, each one thanking Evan for hosting, commenting on how happy Maya seemed. He'd gotten used to the subtle concern in their voices, the worry that a motherless child must be struggling, the relief when they saw that she was okay. After the last guest left, Evan and Maya cleaned up together, a comfortable rhythm they'd developed over countless evenings of shared chores. Did you have fun, sweetheart? It was the best birthday ever. Maya paused, considering. Well, maybe not better than when Mommy was here, but the best since then. I'm glad. Daddy? Yeah? I like Miss Claire. She's nice. She is nice. Is she going to keep being your friend? Evan thought about the question. 6 months ago, he would have said he didn't know, that people like Claire Whitman didn't stay friends with people like him, that eventually she'd move on to some other project and forget about the maintenance worker who'd given her a seat on the subway. But he knew her better now. He'd seen her fight for him, risk her reputation, use every tool at her disposal to protect his family from someone who wanted to hurt them. Yeah, he said. I think she is. Maya nodded, satisfied, and went back to picking up streamers. The simple faith of children, Evan thought. The ability to accept good things without questioning whether they'd last. He was learning to do that too. Slowly, painfully, but learning. The summer brought heat and humidity and the particular chaos of school vacation, when Maya needed constant entertainment, and Mrs. Patterson could only help so much. Evan found himself juggling work and childcare with increasing difficulty, the maintenance jobs piling up while he tried to keep his daughter occupied. Claire noticed. She was observant that way, picking up on things he tried to hide. You're exhausted, she said during one of their weekly meetings. And don't tell me you're fine. I know what fine looks like. And this isn't it. Maya's out of school. It's an adjustment. It's more than that. You're working full-time for the building company, spending hours each week on the foundation work, and trying to be a single parent on top of all of it. Something has to give. I'm handling it. You're surviving it. There's a difference. Evan didn't have an answer to that, because she was right. He was surviving, not thriving, getting through each day rather than actually living it. What if we changed your arrangement? Claire asked. Made the foundation work your primary job, with the maintenance as secondary? We've talked about this. I'm not comfortable taking charity. It wouldn't be charity. It would be a salary for a job you're already doing. A job that matters, that you're good at, that makes a real difference in people's lives. And the maintenance work? You could do it part-time, or not at all if you didn't want to. The point is that you'd have options. You'd have breathing room. Evan thought about Victor's warning. Don't let the rich lady change who you are. But was that what this was? Or was it just adaptation, growth, allowing himself to become something more than he'd been before? I need to think about it, he said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But even as he said the words, he knew what his answer would be. He'd known for months, probably. He just hadn't been ready to admit it. He was tired of surviving. He was ready to live. The transition happened gradually, over the course of the fall. Evan reduced his hours with the building company, taking on the foundation work as his primary focus. The salary was more than he'd ever made as a maintenance worker, enough to move to a slightly larger apartment, to stop worrying about every grocery bill, to start thinking about Maya's future in a way that didn't involve constant anxiety about money. Victor gave him a hard time about it, of course. Going corporate on me, I always knew you'd sell out eventually. I'm not selling out, I'm just expanding. That's what they all say. Next thing you know, you'll be drinking lattes and talking about stakeholder engagement. But Victor was also proud, in his gruff way. He threw Evan a going-away party at the building, complete with a cake that said, "Good luck, trader," in bright blue frosting. You're going to do good things, Victor said, pulling Evan aside after the festivities. I can see it. You've got something most people don't, heart. Don't let them take that from you. I won't. And keep in touch. Just because you're saving the world now doesn't mean you can forget about us regular people. Evan promised. He meant it too. The years he'd spent doing maintenance work had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The patience required to fix things that kept breaking. The humility of working in the shadows while others took the credit. The quiet dignity of showing up every day and doing your job, regardless of whether anyone noticed. Those were the things he'd carry forward into this new chapter. Those were the things that would keep him grounded, even as the world around him changed. By the time winter arrived again, the community program had grown beyond anything Evan had imagined. 12 buildings across 4 neighborhoods, hundreds of children served, dozens of families lifted up by programs designed from the ground level, by people who understood what struggling actually meant. Claire had kept her promise to step back from Whitman Industries, transitioning to a figurehead role that left her free to focus on the foundation work. She spent most of her time now in community centers and coffee shops, meeting with the people the program was meant to serve, listening to their stories, learning from their experiences. She was different than she'd been a year ago, softer somehow, more human. The sharp edges that had defined her, the constant drive, the need for control, had smoothed into something more sustainable. "My therapist says I'm finally processing my mother's death," she told Evan during one of their meetings, that the grief was always there, but I'd buried it under work and achievements and the illusion of control. "How does that feel?" "Terrible, and wonderful, and exhausting." She smiled ruefully. "Turns out, becoming a better person is really hard work." "I could have told you that." "You did tell me that, many times. I just wasn't ready to hear it." Outside the window, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, coating the city in white. Maya was at a friend's house working on a science project about the solar system. Evan had stopped worrying about her so much, had learned to trust that she was strong enough to handle the challenges that came her way. He'd changed too, he realized. Not dramatically, not in ways that would be visible to someone who didn't know him, but in the quiet spaces inside himself where Sarah's death had left a wound that he'd thought would never heal. The wound was still there. It would always be there. But it had stopped bleeding. It had started to scar over, to become part of him in a way that he could live with. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" Claire asked. "What?" "That day on the subway, when you gave me your seat. That was almost 2 years ago." "I know, but I keep coming back to it, trying to understand why it affected me so much." "And have you figured it out?" Claire was quiet for a moment, watching the snow fall. I think it was because you saw me. Not Claire Whitman, the billionaire, not the founder of a company or the chair of a foundation, just a woman who looked tired, who needed a seat." "You did look tired." "I was tired. I just lost my mother. I didn't know what I was doing on that train. I just knew I couldn't face another day of pretending everything was fine. And then some stranger gave you a seat. And then some stranger gave me a seat. And somehow, that one small thing, that one moment of genuine kindness, it broke something loose in me, something that had been frozen for a very long time." Evan thought about all the moments that had led them here. The coffee shop meeting, the first community program, the CPS investigation, the countless conversations and conflicts and small victories that had built this partnership, this friendship, this whatever it was that defied easy labels. "Sarah used to say that kindness was like water," he said. "It finds its own level. It flows into the places that need it most, even if you can't see where it's going." She sounds like she was very wise. She was. She was the best person I've ever known. "Better than me?" Evan smiled. "Different. You're both the best in different ways." The snow continued to fall outside, transforming the city into something softer, quieter. 2 people sat together in a warm room, connected by a moment of kindness that had rippled outward in ways neither of them could have predicted. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still problems to solve, challenges to face, battles to fight. The work was never done, would never be done, as long as there were people who needed help and systems that needed changing. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. It was more than enough. The snow that winter was the heaviest New York had seen in a decade, and the program's reach was tested in ways none of them had anticipated. Heating systems failed in aging buildings. Families who had been barely getting by suddenly faced impossible choices between food and warmth. The coordinators Rosa and Angela had trained worked around the clock, connecting people to emergency resources, organizing supply drives, doing the 1,000 small things that kept communities from falling apart. Evan found himself at the center of it all, not because he'd sought the role, but because people trusted him. He was the one they called when a boiler broke at 2 a.m. and the landlord wasn't answering. He was the one who knew which families were too proud to ask for help, but desperately needed it. He was the one who understood, from lived experience, what it meant to choose between keeping your lights on and keeping your daughter fed. "You're running yourself into the ground," Claire said during one of their rare moments of quiet. Both of them huddled in a community center kitchen while volunteers served hot meals to families displaced by a water main break. "No more than anyone else." "That's not true, and you know it. I've been watching you. You're the first one here every morning and the last one to leave every night." "There's a lot to do." "There's always a lot to do. That doesn't mean you have to do all of it yourself." Evan poured himself a cup of coffee, his 5th of the day, probably his 10th, and leaned against the counter. His back ached from hours of carrying supplies up flights of stairs in buildings where the elevators didn't work. His hands were chapped from the cold, despite the gloves he kept forgetting to wear. "I know what it's like," he said quietly. "To be scared. To not know if you're going to make it through the week. These families, they're going through what I went through after Sarah died. And if I can make that even a little bit easier." "You can't save everyone, Evan." "I'm not trying to save everyone. I'm just trying to help the people in front of me." Claire was quiet for a moment, studying him with those sharp eyes that saw more than most people realized. "When was the last time you took a day off?" "I don't remember." "When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Read a book, watched a movie, sat in a park, and did absolutely nothing?" He couldn't answer that either, because the truth was that he'd forgotten what that felt like. Every moment that wasn't spent working or caring for Maya was consumed by the foundation work, by the endless demands of communities that had been neglected for generations. "I'm worried about you," Claire said. "Don't be." "I'm going to be anyway. That's what friends do." She reached out and put a hand on his arm, and Evan felt something loosen in his chest. He'd spent so long being the one who held things together, who stayed strong for everyone else. It was strange to have someone worry about him. "I'll take a day off," he said. "Soon, when things settle down." "Things never settle down. That's the nature of this work." "Then I'll take a day off anyway. Eventually." Claire shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." The crisis passed, as crises always did. The snow melted, the temperatures rose, and the city emerged from its frozen cocoon into the tentative promise of spring. The community program had survived its first major test, and in some ways, it was stronger for it. The families they'd helped remembered who had shown up for them, and word spread through neighborhoods that had learned to distrust outsiders with good intentions. Maya turned 9 that spring, and her birthday party was even bigger than the year before. 15 kids from school, plus a few from the after-school program who had become her friends. She'd asked for a science theme this year, experiments and demonstrations, and a cake shaped like a chemistry set, complete with edible test tubes made of sugar. "She's going to be president someday," Rosa said, watching Maya explain the volcano experiment to a group of rapt 8-year-olds. "Or a scientist, or both." "She can be whatever she wants," Evan said, "as long as she's happy." "She looks happy to me." She did. That was the thing that still surprised him, even now. How much light Maya had in her, how thoroughly she'd healed from the darkness of losing her mother. There were still hard days, moments when the grief surfaced unexpectedly. But they were fewer now, further between, integrated into a life that was genuinely, unmistakably good. He thought about Sarah, as he often did at moments like this. What would she think of the person Maya was becoming? Would she be proud of the choices he'd made, the paths he'd taken? He hoped so. He had to believe she would be. The summer brought new challenges and new opportunities. The foundation received a major grant that allowed them to expand into 2 additional neighborhoods, each one presenting its own unique set of needs and complications. Evan spent weeks meeting with community leaders, listening to their concerns, trying to understand what had worked and what hadn't in the programs that had come before. Not everyone welcomed them. There were people who had seen too many well-meaning outsiders come and go, who didn't trust promises that sounded too good to be true. Evan understood their skepticism. He'd felt it himself, not so long ago. You can't just walk in here and tell us what we need, a woman named Denise Washington told him at one particularly contentious community meeting. She was a mother of 3, had lived in the neighborhood her whole life, and she was tired of being treated like a problem to be solved. We know what we need. What we don't need is another program that's going to disappear in 2 years when the funding runs out. That's fair, Evan said. And I'm not going to promise you that we're different, because you've heard that before. All I can do is tell you what we've done in other neighborhoods and let you decide for yourself. And what have you done? So he told her. About the after-school programs that parents had designed, not administrators. About the emergency fund that was controlled by a committee of community members, not foundation executives. About the way they'd built systems that could survive changes in leadership so that the work wouldn't collapse if any one person left. Denise listened, arms crossed, expression skeptical. When he finished, she didn't say anything for a long moment. My son goes to PS 147, she said finally. He's been struggling this year. His teacher says he needs a tutor, but I work 2 jobs. I don't have time to take him somewhere after school, and I don't have money to pay someone to come to us. We can help with that. We have tutors who can come to your building, work with him there. No cost to you. And what do you want in return? Nothing. That's the whole point. Denise studied him, looking for the catch, the angle. You really believe that? That rich people are going to help us for nothing? Evan thought about Claire, about the journey she'd been on over the past 2 years, about all the ways she'd changed, all the assumptions she'd had to unlearn. I believe that people can surprise you, he said. I believe that some people actually want to help, not because it makes them look good or because they expect something back, but because it's the right thing to do. And this billionaire you work for, she's one of those people. She's trying to be. She's not perfect. None of us are. But she's trying. Denise uncrossed her arms, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite trust, not yet, but openness, a willingness to consider that this might be different. Fine, she said. Send the tutor. But if this is another scam, another program that's going to disappear when things get hard, I will make your life very difficult. You understand? I understand. Good. Then we have a deal. The tutor started the following week. By the end of the month, Denise's son was making progress in school, and Denise herself had joined the community advisory committee that helped guide the program's decisions. That was how it worked, Evan was learning. One person at a time, one conversation at a time, building trust through action, not words. Claire came to the neighborhood a few weeks later, wanting to see the expansion for herself. She walked the streets with Evan, visited the community center where the programs were run, met with the families who had started to use the services. It's different here, she said afterward, sitting on a bench in a small park while kids played on the swings. The other neighborhoods, they'd been softened up already, had experience with programs that worked. This one has been burned too many times. They don't trust easily. But they trust you. Evan shrugged. Some of them. A few. It takes time. That's okay. We have time. She said it casually, but Evan knew what it meant. 2 years ago, Claire Whitman would have wanted immediate results, measurable outcomes, proof that her investment was paying off. Now she was willing to wait, to let things unfold at their own pace. You've changed, he said. I hope so. I've been working at it. No, I mean, really changed. The Claire I met on that subway, she wouldn't have been sitting on this bench watching kids play, content to let things happen slowly. Claire smiled, a small private expression that Evan had come to recognize. That Claire was miserable. She just didn't know it yet. And this Claire? This Claire is getting better, learning to be happy with enough instead of always reaching for more. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play. A boy on the swings was pumping his legs, trying to go higher, higher, until it seemed like he might launch himself into the sky. Maya wants to be an astronaut, Evan said. Did I tell you that? About 100 times. She's serious about it. She reads everything she can find about space. She's already talking about which colleges have the best aerospace programs. She's 9. She's ambitious. Gets it from her mother. Claire turned to look at him. Gets it from you too, I think. You're more ambitious than you realize. I don't feel ambitious. I just feel driven, like there's something I'm supposed to do, and I haven't figured out what it is yet. Maybe that's what ambition is. Not wanting fame or money or power, but wanting to matter, to make a difference. Evan thought about that. He'd never considered himself ambitious. That word had always meant something else to him, something closer to ruthlessness or self-interest. But maybe Claire was right. Maybe there was another kind of ambition, one that was about contribution rather than accumulation. I should get back, he said finally. Maya's going to want dinner soon, and I promised her we'd work on her model rocket tonight. The model rocket? I heard about that. She's building it herself. I'm just supervising. I'd love to see it sometime. The launch, I mean, if that's okay. Evan smiled. I'll let you know when it's ready. The rocket launched in mid-August, in a park uptown that had enough open space for the kind of flight Maya was planning. She'd spent 3 months building it, carefully following the instructions, painting it in bright silver and blue, because those were her favorite colors. Half the neighborhood came to watch. Rosa and Angela, with their families. Victor, who had taken the train all the way from his building in Midtown. The kids from Maya's school and the after-school program. Parents Evan had met through the community work, who wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Claire was there too, standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching with an expression Evan couldn't quite read. Okay, Maya, he said, kneeling next to his daughter. This is your moment. You ready? She nodded, her face a mixture of excitement and nerves. Her hands were steady as she positioned the launch controller, but Evan could see the slight tremor in her shoulders. Remember, he said quietly, whatever happens, I'm proud of you. Win or lose, success or failure, you built something, you tried something hard. That's what matters. Maya looked at him, her mother's eyes in her 9-year-old face. I know, Daddy, but it's going to work. I can feel it. She pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a hiss, a spark, and the rocket shot upward, climbing into the August sky with a trail of white smoke behind it. It rose higher than anyone expected, higher than Maya had predicted, until it was just a silver speck against the blue. And then the parachute deployed, exactly as it was supposed to, and the rocket began its slow descent back to Earth. The crowd erupted. Kids cheering, adults clapping, Maya jumping up and down with her arms in the air. Evan felt tears prick at his eyes, not from the launch itself, but from the joy on his daughter's face, the pure, uncomplicated happiness of a child who had set a goal and achieved it. She did it, Claire said, appearing at his elbow. She actually did it. She did. You raised an incredible kid, Evan. I had help. He thought about Mrs. Patterson, about Rosa and Angela, about all the people who had supported them over the years. It takes a village, right? It takes a village. And a really dedicated father. Maya came running over, the recovered rocket clutched in her hands. Did you see that? Did you see how high it went? The parachute worked perfectly, just like I designed it. I saw, Evan said, scooping her up into a hug. You were amazing. Can we do it again? Can we build a bigger one? We can talk about it. But first, let's celebrate this one. The celebration lasted all afternoon. An impromptu party in the park with food from a nearby deli and music playing from someone's phone. Maya showed anyone who would look exactly how she'd built the rocket, explaining the engineering principles she'd learned from her books and her science teacher. Evan watched from the edge of the crowd, feeling something settle in his chest. This was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of connection, community, people who showed up for each other. He thought about Claire's question all those months ago. What makes someone kind? And he thought he finally understood the answer. Kindness wasn't about grand gestures or charitable donations. It was about showing up, being present, caring about the people in front of you, even when it was hard. That was what he tried to model for Maya. That was what he tried to build with the community program. And that was what he saw in Claire, more and more with each passing day. The summer faded into fall, and Maya started 4th grade with the particular confidence of a child who had launched a rocket into the sky. Her teachers reported that she was doing well, excelling actually, especially in science and math. She'd made friends easily, joined the school's robotics club, begun talking about science fairs and engineering competitions. Evan worried sometimes that she was doing too much, that he'd somehow passed his own tendency to overwork onto his daughter. But every time he asked her if she wanted to slow down, she looked at him like he was crazy. "I like being busy, Daddy. It's fun. Why would I want to do less?" He couldn't argue with that. And anyway, she seemed happy, genuinely, sustainably happy, in a way that didn't come from avoiding feelings, but from embracing them. Maybe that was the real legacy he was building, not just the programs and the systems and the organizational charts, but a daughter who knew how to find joy in work, how to connect with community, how to be kind without expecting anything in return. The foundation's third anniversary came in November, marked by a small gathering at the community center where it had all begun. Rosa and Angela spoke about the impact they'd seen, the test scores rising, the families stabilizing, the sense of hope that had taken root in neighborhoods that had learned to expect disappointment. Claire spoke too, though she insisted on keeping her remarks brief. "3 years ago, I was a different person," she said. "I thought I could fix problems by writing checks. I thought I understood poverty because I'd read about it in reports. I was wrong about almost everything." The crowd laughed, recognizing the self-deprecation that had become Claire's trademark. "What changed," she continued, "was meeting people who told me the truth, who didn't care about my money or my influence, who just cared about whether I was actually listening." Evan Brooks is one of those people. Rosa and Angela are others. The families who trusted us with their children, their hopes, their fears, they're the ones who built this. I just provided some of the resources. Evan felt uncomfortable being singled out, as he always did when Claire praised him publicly. But he also felt proud, not of himself exactly, but of what they'd built together. This improbable partnership between a billionaire and a maintenance worker, forged in a moment of kindness on a crowded subway train. After the formal remarks, after the mingling and the small talk, Claire found him by the coffee station. "I've been thinking," she said. "That's usually when trouble starts. I'm serious. I've been thinking about what comes next. For me, for the foundation, for all of it. And I want to expand, not just to more neighborhoods, but to other cities. Replicate what we've built here in places that need it." Evan raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious," says the man who spent the last year convincing me that patience was a virtue. It is a virtue, but so is vision, and what you're describing would help a lot of people. That's what I was hoping you'd say, because I want you to help lead it. Evan set down his coffee cup. "Lead what, exactly?" "The expansion. I want you to travel to other cities, meet with community leaders, help them build programs based on what we've learned here, not as an employee, as a partner, someone with real authority to make decisions." "Claire, I can't just leave New York. Maya's in school. We have a life here." "I know. I'm not asking you to move. I'm asking you to travel sometimes, a few days a month, maybe a week. Maya could come with you during school breaks. It would be educational, seeing how different cities work. And the rest of the time you'd be here. Same as always." Evan thought about it, really thought about it, turning the idea over in his mind the way he'd learned to do with complex problems. The opportunities it would create, the challenges it would pose, the impact it could have on families he'd never met, in places he'd never been. "I need to talk to Maya," he said finally. "This affects her too. She gets a vote." "Of course. Take all the time you need." "And if she says no?" Claire smiled. "Then we figure out something else. That's what we do. We figure things out." Maya's response surprised him. He'd expected reluctance, maybe even resistance. Instead, she got quiet for a moment, thinking, and then said, "Would I get to see where you grew up?" "What?" "You grew up in Cleveland, right? Would we go there?" "Maybe. Eventually, if we expanded the program there, then I think you should do it." She said it with the simple certainty of a child who hadn't yet learned to second-guess herself. "You help people, Daddy. That's what you're good at. And if you can help more people in more places, why wouldn't you? Because it would mean being away from you sometimes. But not forever, and I'd get to come with you on the fun trips." She grinned. "Plus, I could see different rockets in different cities. They probably have good museums everywhere." Evan laughed despite himself. "You've been thinking about this." "Maybe a little. He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo, feeling her small body warm against his. She was growing up so fast. In a few years, she wouldn't want hugs like this anymore. She'd be a teenager with all the complications that entailed. But right now, in this moment, she was still his little girl, the person he loved most in the world, the reason he'd survived the worst years of his life. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." The first expansion trip was to Philadelphia in early December. Evan spent 3 days meeting with community organizers, touring neighborhoods, listening to stories that echoed the ones he'd heard in New York. Different cities, different details, but the same underlying struggles. Parents working multiple jobs and still falling short. Children growing up in poverty that seemed inescapable. Systems that were supposed to help but too often made things worse. He came back exhausted but energized. There was so much need, so much opportunity to make a difference. And he had tools now, resources, connections, experience that he hadn't had before. "How was it?" Claire asked when he returned. "Overwhelming, inspiring, terrifying. Sounds about right. They want to start with 2 buildings in North Philadelphia, similar model to what we did here, but adapted for their specific context. They've already identified community leaders who can help run things." "That's faster than I expected. They've been waiting for this. They just needed someone to believe in them." Claire nodded slowly. "And did you? Believe in them?" Evan thought about the people he'd met. The mother who ran a makeshift tutoring program out of her living room because she couldn't afford anything more. The retired teacher who spent her days checking on elderly neighbors, making sure they had food and medicine. The young man who had pulled himself out of a gang and now mentored kids who were heading down the same path. "Yeah," he said, "I believed in them. They're the same as the people here, tired, scared, trying their best with not enough resources. They just need support, same as everyone." Christmas that year was the best Evan could remember. Maya had asked for books about space and engineering, and he'd found her a telescope that they set up on the fire escape, pointing at the winter stars. She spent hours with it, mapping constellations, talking about the planet she wanted to visit someday. Claire came for Christmas dinner, her second year doing so, at Maya's insistence. She brought gifts and wine, and a certain awkwardness that never quite disappeared, no matter how many times they did this. "I don't know how to do holidays," she admitted, sitting in Evan's small kitchen while he finished the ham. "My family was never good at them, even before my mother died." "Nobody knows how to do holidays. We all just fake it." "You don't fake it. This feels—" She gestured at the small apartment, at the tree in the corner, at Maya playing with her new telescope. "Real, comfortable, like something out of a movie." "It's not a movie. It's just life. And you're part of it now, whether you like it or not." Claire looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "Do you know what I was doing 3 Christmases ago?" "What?" "Sitting in my penthouse alone, drinking very expensive scotch and feeling sorry for myself. I told myself I didn't need holidays, didn't need family, didn't need any of the things other people needed. I was above all that. And now? Now I'm sitting in a kitchen in Washington Heights, helping a maintenance worker cook ham, while his daughter explains the moons of Jupiter to me." She laughed, a short, surprised sound. "I don't know how I got here, Evan, but I'm glad I did." Maya appeared in the doorway, telescope in hand. "Miss Claire, did you know that Jupiter has 79 moons? That's way more than Earth." "I did not know that. 79 seems like too many. There's no such thing as too many moons. The more moons you have, the more interesting your planet is. That's a good philosophy. Daddy says philosophy is just a fancy word for thinking about thinking. Your daddy is a wise man." Maya grinned and disappeared back into the living room. Claire watched her go, something wistful in her expression. "I never had children," she said quietly. "Never wanted them. I thought they would slow me down, keep me from achieving what I wanted to achieve." "Do you regret that?" "Sometimes. Moments like this." She shook her head. "But mostly I think I made the right choice. I wouldn't have been a good mother. I was too focused on myself, too driven by things that didn't matter. You might surprise yourself. You've surprised yourself about a lot of things. Maybe. But I'm 64 years old now. The time for children is past. The time for biological children, maybe. But there are other ways to be part of a kid's life. Claire looked at him. What are you saying? Evan wasn't sure what he was saying. The words had come out before he'd fully thought them through. But now that they were there, hanging in the air between them, he realized they were true. Maya doesn't have a grandmother, he said. Sarah's mother passed away before she was born, and my mother died when Maya was a baby. She's never had an older woman in her life who wasn't a teacher or a caretaker. You want me to be her grandmother? I want you to be her something, her mentor, her friend. Whatever feels right. She already looks up to you. She talks about you all the time. Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I don't know if I deserve that. It's not about deserving. It's about showing up, being present, caring. The things you've been teaching me for 3 years. The things we've been teaching each other. Maya reappeared in the doorway. The ham is going to burn if you don't take it out. I can smell it. She was right. Evan pulled the ham from the oven, slightly overdone but salvageable. They ate dinner together, the three of them around the small table, talking about rockets and moons and the neighborhoods they were going to help in the new year. It wasn't a fairy tale. Claire still struggled with the impulse to control, to fix, to make things happen through force of will. Evan still worked too hard, still forgot to take care of himself, still carried the weight of Sarah's absence like a stone in his chest. Maya still had bad days, still woke up sometimes crying for a mother who would never come back. But they had each other. They had community. They had the slow, patient work of building something meaningful, one day at a time. And they had this moment, Christmas dinner in a small apartment, snow falling outside, the warmth of connection filling the spaces that grief had carved out. It was enough. It was more than enough. The new year began with the Philadelphia expansion officially launching. 2 buildings, just as they'd planned, with local leaders running the programs and Evan providing guidance from afar. The model worked, translating from New York to a new city with fewer problems than anyone had expected. By spring, they were talking about Baltimore. By summer, Boston. Each new city brought its own challenges, its own personalities, its own lessons about what worked and what didn't. Evan traveled more than he'd ever imagined, but he also came home, always came home, to Maya, to the community he'd helped build, to the life that had surprised him by becoming good. Claire traveled too, but differently than she had before. Instead of boardrooms and investor meetings, she visited community centers and playgrounds. She sat in living rooms and listened to stories. She wrote checks without expecting recognition, made decisions without needing to be in charge. She was becoming someone new, someone her mother might have recognized, someone who understood that kindness wasn't weakness, that vulnerability wasn't failure, that the most important things in life couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. And Evan watched her change, watched himself change, watched the world around them slowly, incrementally, impossibly become a little bit better. He thought about that morning on the subway, 3 years ago now. A crowded train, a tired woman. A choice he'd made without thinking, because it was simply the right thing to do. He could never have predicted where that choice would lead, the connections it would forge, the lives it would touch, the person he would become. None of it made sense if you tried to analyze it. None of it followed any logic he could have planned. But maybe that was how kindness worked. Not according to plan or strategy, but through accumulation. Small acts building on each other, rippling outward in ways no one could predict. A seat given to a stranger. A conversation in a coffee shop. A program built from the ground up. A city transformed, one family at a time. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a man who had learned that survival wasn't enough. That what mattered was connection, community, the simple act of showing up for the people who needed you. Spring became summer. The city bloomed with life and possibility. And in a small apartment in Washington Heights, a father and daughter sat on the fire escape, pointing a telescope at the stars, talking about all the places they might go someday. 5 years passed like water through fingers, each moment distinct and yet somehow blurred together when Maya looked back on them. She was 14 now, tall like her mother had been, with the same dark hair and quick intelligence. The telescope on the fire escape had been replaced by more sophisticated equipment, and her bedroom walls were covered with star charts and mission patches from NASA programs she'd memorized by heart. Evan stood in the doorway of her room, watching her pack for the trip that would take her to a summer science camp in Florida. 3 weeks at the Kennedy Space Center, surrounded by kids like her who dreamed of stars and equations and the vast possibility of space. She'd won a scholarship to attend, one of the competitive grants that the foundation now offered to students from underserved communities. "You're sure you have everything?" he asked. "Dad, I've checked the list 4 times. Toothbrush? Yes. Phone charger? Yes. Extra socks? Because you always forget extra socks." Maya turned and gave him a look that was pure teenager, exasperated and amused in equal measure. "I'm 14, not 4. I can pack a suitcase." "I know, I just—" He trailed off, not sure how to articulate the complicated feeling in his chest, pride and fear and love, all tangled together. His little girl was growing up. She didn't need him the way she used to. "I know," Maya said, her voice softening. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. She was almost as tall as he was now, another thing that had crept up on him without warning. "I'm going to miss you too. Call me every day." "I'll call you every other day. The schedule is packed." "Fine, every other day. But text me when you land. I will. I promise." The hug lasted longer than either of them had planned. Evan thought about all the hugs they'd shared over the years. The desperate ones after Sarah died, the comforting ones during hard times, the celebratory ones after Maya's achievements, each one a small anchor in the storm of growing up. "Your mom would be so proud of you," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Maya pulled back, her eyes bright. "I know. You tell me all the time." "Because it's true." "I know that too." She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like Sarah, the same tilt of the head, the same warmth in her expression. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad, for everything you've built, for who you've become." Evan didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and helped her carry the suitcase to the door. The ride to the airport was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. New York passed by outside the windows, the city that had been their home through everything, the place where they'd rebuilt their lives after loss had broken them apart. Claire was meeting them at the terminal. She'd insisted on being there to see Maya off, even though her own schedule was packed with meetings about the foundation's expansion into 3 new cities. In the 5 years since that first conversation in the coffee shop, she'd become something like family. Not quite a grandmother, not quite an aunt, but something uniquely her own. "There she is," Maya said, pointing through the window. Claire was standing at the curb, dressed more casually than she'd ever been when Evan first met her. The woman who had once worn power-like armor now looked comfortable in jeans and a simple sweater. "Ready?" Evan asked. "Ready." Maya took a deep breath. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything. For not giving up after Mom died. For building a life for us. For being the kind of person who gives up his seat on the subway for strangers." Evan felt tears prick at his eyes. "How do you know about that?" "Miss Claire told me. Years ago. She said it was the moment that changed everything." "It was just a seat." "No, it wasn't." Maya's voice was steady, certain. "It was a choice. The kind of choice that matters." They got out of the car and joined Claire on the curb. The 3 of them walked into the terminal together, navigating the crowds and security lines with the practiced ease of people who had learned to move through the world as a unit. At the gate, Maya hugged them both. Evan first, then Claire, then Evan again, because she wasn't ready to let go. 3 weeks, Claire said. "It'll fly by." "I know, but I'm still going to miss you both." "We'll be here when you get back," Evan said. Same as always. Maya nodded, wiped her eyes, and picked up her bag. She was halfway down the jetway when she turned and waved one last time. Then she was gone, disappearing into the plane that would take her toward her dreams. Evan and Claire stood at the window, watching the aircraft taxi away from the gate. "She's going to do great things," Claire said quietly. "She already has. I mean bigger things, the kind of things that change the world." "Maybe." Evan thought about all the possibilities that lay ahead of his daughter, the discoveries she might make, the problems she might solve, the lives she might touch. Or maybe she'll just be kind. Maybe she'll make choices that matter, even when no one's watching, That would be enough. It would be more than enough. They watched until the plane lifted off, climbing into the morning sky until it was just a speck of silver against the blue. Then they turned and walked out of the terminal together. Two people who had found each other through chance and built something meaningful out of the wreckage of grief. The next 3 weeks were strange for Evan. He'd grown so accustomed to organizing his life around Maya's needs, her school schedule, her activities, her constant presence, that her absence felt like missing a limb. The apartment was too quiet, the evenings too empty. He filled the time with work, throwing himself into the foundation's operations with an intensity that Rosa and Angela had to gently push back against. "You're doing it again," Rosa said one afternoon, finding him still at his desk at 8 in the evening. "The thing where you try to save the world because you don't know what to do with yourself." "I'm not trying to save the world. You're trying to distract yourself. Same thing with you." Evan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Is it that obvious?" "To people who know you, yes." Rosa sat down across from him. "Maya's fine. She sent me pictures from the camp. She's having the time of her life." "I know. She texted me today. Said she got to meet an actual astronaut. So why are you still here working like the building's on fire?" He didn't have a good answer. The truth was complicated, a mixture of habit, identity, and the particular loneliness that came with being a single parent whose child was growing up in a way. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," he admitted. "When she's not here. When there's no one depending on me." Rosa nodded slowly. "You know what that tells me? It tells me you've spent so long taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten how to take care of yourself." "That sounds like something a therapist would say. Maybe you should talk to one." "I had a therapist. After Sarah died, it helped. So get another one. There's no rule that says you can only see a therapist during a crisis. Sometimes it's just maintenance, keeping the engine running smooth." Evan thought about it. The past 5 years had been intense. Building the foundation, traveling to new cities, raising Maya through the complicated transition from childhood to adolescence. He'd been so focused on forward motion that he'd never stopped to assess whether he was actually okay. "Maybe you're right," he said. "I'm always right. Ask Angela." He started seeing someone the following week, a therapist named Dr. Chen who specialized in grief and transition. The sessions were difficult at first, dredging up feelings he'd buried under years of work and responsibility. But they were also clarifying, helping him understand patterns he hadn't recognized. "You've built your identity around being needed," Dr. Chen observed during their third session. "First by Maya, then by the communities you serve. What happens when that need diminishes?" "I don't know. That's the problem." "What did you want to be before Sarah died? Before you became a single father? Before the foundation?" Evan struggled to remember. It felt like a lifetime ago. The person he'd been before loss had reshaped him. "I wanted to build things, fix things. I was good with my hands. I liked solving problems." "And do you still do that?" "The foundation work is problem solving, just on a different scale. But it's not the same as actually building something yourself, actually putting your hands on a problem and fixing it." He thought about his years as a maintenance worker, the satisfaction of making a broken system work again, the simple, tangible pleasure of physical labor. "I miss it," he admitted, "the hands-on work. I miss feeling like I'm actually doing something instead of just managing people who are doing something." "So do something. Nothing's stopping you." It seemed too simple, and yet the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The foundation was stable now, running smoothly under the leadership of the community members who had always been its heart. Rosa and Angela didn't need him hovering over every decision. They'd proven, time and again, that they were more than capable of handling whatever came their way. Maybe it was time to let go a little, to remember what it felt like to be just Evan Brooks, not the co-founder of a foundation, not the partner of a billionaire philanthropist, just a man who was good at fixing things. He started small. Volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity, spending Saturdays swinging hammers and installing drywall in homes being built for families who needed them. The physical labor felt good, the ache in his muscles, the sweat on his brow, the simple satisfaction of watching something take shape under his hands. The other volunteers were curious about him at first. Word had gotten around that he was connected to the Whitman Foundation, and people expected something else. Someone important, someone impressive. "You're really just here to work?" asked a young woman named Jessica, who was building her first home after years of housing instability. "Not to supervise or take pictures for a newsletter?" "Just here to work," Evan confirmed. "Hand me that level?" She passed it to him, watching as he checked the alignment of the wall frame. "You know what you're doing. I used to do this for a living, building maintenance, before you became a big deal." He laughed. "I'm not a big deal. I'm just a guy who got lucky." "Doesn't seem like luck to me. Seems like work." "Maybe both. The luck gets you in the door. The work keeps you there." Jessica considered this. "My caseworker said something like that. Said opportunity doesn't mean anything if you're not ready to grab it." "Smart caseworker." "She's one of yours, actually, from the foundation. Rosa something." Evan smiled. "Rosa Gutierrez. She's one of the best people I know. She believed in me when nobody else did, got me into the housing program, helped me get my GED, connected me with job training." Jessica paused, looking around at the half-built house that would soon be her home. "I used to think people like you, rich people, powerful people, I thought you were all the same, looking down on us, thinking you knew better. And now? Now I think some of you actually give a damn. Not all, but some. That's progress, I guess. It's more than progress. It's hope." She picked up a hammer and got back to work. "That's what your foundation gave me. Not just resources. Hope." Maya came home from science camp transformed. Not in any dramatic way. She was still the same girl who had left, still obsessed with space and stars and the infinite possibilities of the universe. But there was a new confidence in her bearing, a certainty that hadn't been there before. "I know what I want to do," she announced at dinner, her first night back. "I want to be an aerospace engineer, not just an astronaut. I want to design the ships that take people to space." "That's a big goal," Evan said. "I know, but I can do it. I met people at camp who are doing it. Women engineers who work at NASA and SpaceX and Boeing. They said it's hard, but it's possible. They said the most important thing is not to let anyone tell you that you can't." "Has anyone told you that you can't?" "Not yet, but they will." That's what one of the engineers said, that being a woman in aerospace means constantly proving yourself, constantly fighting for respect. Maya's jaw set in a way that reminded Evan powerfully of Sarah. "I'm ready for that fight." "I believe you are. And even if I fail, even if I never get to design spaceships, I'll have tried. I'll have reached for something big. That matters, right?" "It matters more than anything." Later, after Maya had gone to bed, Evan sat on the fire escape and looked at the stars. The same stars his daughter wanted to reach. The same stars Sarah had loved to watch on summer nights, lying beside him on a blanket in Central Park. 7 years since she'd died. 7 years of grief and growth, of struggle and survival, of becoming someone he never imagined he could be. The pain was still there. Would always be there, he suspected. But it had become something he could carry, a weight that no longer crushed him. He thought about all the choices that had led him here. The decision to keep going after Sarah's death, even when he wanted to give up. The choice to give up his seat for a tired stranger on a crowded train. The willingness to trust Claire to build something together, to let people into the carefully guarded space around his heart. None of it had been inevitable. Every step had been a choice, a decision to move forward instead of standing still. And every choice had led to the next, building a life he could be proud of. Maya would make her own choices. She'd face her own struggles, find her own way. He couldn't protect her from everything. That had never been the job. The job was to prepare her, to model what it looked like to keep showing up, keep trying, keep reaching for something better, even when the odds seemed impossible. He thought she was ready. More than ready. The Foundation's 10th anniversary celebration was held on a Saturday in September, in the community center where it had all begun. The building had been renovated since those early days, fresh paint, new equipment, expanded spaces for the programs that had grown beyond anyone's expectations. But the essential character remained the same. It was still a place built by and for the community, a space where families came to learn and connect and support each other. Evan arrived early, helping to set up chairs and arrange tables. Old habits died hard. Even now, after a decade of leadership roles and important meetings, He felt most comfortable when his hands were busy. Rosa found him straightening centerpieces. You know we have staff for that, right? I know, just feels strange to stand around doing nothing. You've been doing that less lately. The volunteer work, the building projects. Angela says you've been spending every weekend with a hammer in your hand. It helps me think. It helps you avoid your feelings, is what it does. But Rosa was smiling. Not that I'm complaining, whatever keeps you sane. The guests began arriving. Community members past and present, foundation staff, local officials, journalists who wanted to cover the anniversary. Claire came with her brother Daniel, who had grown closer to her since their mother's death. The estrangement that had defined their relationship for decades had slowly healed, another casualty of the transformation Claire had undergone. Maya was there too, now 15 and poised on the edge of adulthood. She'd dressed up for the occasion, a rare event, and was circulating through the crowd with the natural grace of someone who had grown up surrounded by community work. She's remarkable, Claire said, appearing at Evan's elbow. I know you hear that all the time, but it's true. I hear it a lot. Doesn't make it less strange. Strange? That she turned out so well, given everything. Evan watched his daughter charm a group of elderly community members, listening to their stories with genuine interest. I spent so many years terrified that I was screwing her up, that losing her mother so young would break something in her that couldn't be fixed. Kids are resilient. Some kids, not all. And resilience isn't guaranteed, it has to be nurtured. He shook his head. I got lucky. We got lucky. You worked for it, every single day. Both can be true. The formal program began with speeches from Rosa and Angela, reflecting on the decade of growth and impact. They talked about numbers, thousands of families served, dozens of neighborhoods transformed, but also about individual stories. The single mother who had gone back to school and was now a registered nurse. The teenager who had been headed for prison and was now in college. The elderly couple who had found community after decades of isolation. Claire spoke briefly, crediting everyone but herself. Evan had noticed that about her over the years. The more she actually accomplished, the less she needed recognition. The desperate hunger for validation that had driven her early philanthropy had been replaced by something quieter. A confidence that didn't require external proof. When it was Evan's turn to speak, he stepped to the microphone with the particular awkwardness of someone who had never fully grown comfortable with public attention. 10 years ago, he began, I was a maintenance worker who could barely pay his bills. I was a widower trying to figure out how to raise a daughter alone. I was broken in a lot of ways, and I didn't see how any of that was going to change. The room was quiet, listening. I'm not going to tell you that one person can change the world. That's not true, or at least it's not the whole truth. What happened here, what we built together, it wasn't about any one person, it was about all of us, choosing to show up for each other, choosing to believe that things could be better. He looked out at the crowd, at Rosa and Angela, at Claire, at his daughter, at the hundreds of faces he'd come to know over the years. Someone asked me once, what makes a person kind? I didn't have a good answer then. I'm not sure I have one now. But I think kindness is a practice, something you do, not something you are. You wake up every day and you choose to care about the people around you. You choose to help, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching, even when you're not sure it'll make any difference. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My wife believed that. She lived it. Every day she was a teacher. She saw potential in kids that other people had given up on, and she fought for them. Not because she expected something in return, but because that's who she was. His voice caught slightly. Maya was watching him, her eyes bright. I've spent the last decade trying to be worthy of her memory, trying to raise our daughter the way she would have wanted, trying to build something that mattered, something that lasted. I don't know if I've succeeded. I don't know if anyone ever really knows that. He looked at Claire, who nodded almost imperceptibly. But I know this. We're not done. The work isn't finished. There are still families struggling, still communities being left behind, still systems that need to change. And as long as that's true, there's more to do. He stepped back from the microphone. The applause that followed was warm, but not overwhelming, the sound of a community acknowledging one of its own. After the formal program, the celebration continued informally. Food was served, music played, Children ran through the crowd in the chaotic joy of an event that belonged to everyone. Evan moved through it all, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, feeling the particular blend of pride and exhaustion that came with moments like this. Maya found him near the dessert table, trying unsuccessfully to avoid the cake that Rosa kept pushing on him. "Good speech," she said. "You think?" "Yeah, especially the part about Mom." "I wasn't sure if I should mention her. It's been so long." "She's always worth mentioning." Maya leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that took him back to when she was small enough to carry. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "The foundation, the work you do, all of it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I used to think I wanted to go to space because it was exciting, because I liked the science and the adventure and the idea of being somewhere no one had been before. And now? Now I think I want to go to space because of what it could mean for people down here. New technologies, new resources, new ways of solving problems. The engineers I met at camp, they're not just building rockets, they're building the future." "That sounds like a good reason." "It's your reason too, isn't it? The foundation, the community work. You're not just helping people survive, you're building the future." Evan thought about it. He'd never framed his work in those terms, but Maya wasn't wrong. Every family they helped, every child who got a better education, every community that became more resilient, it was all part of something larger. A future that could be better than the present if enough people chose to work for it. "Maybe," he said. "I never thought about it that way." "That's because you're too busy actually doing the work to think about what it means." Maya grinned. "Good thing you have me to explain it to you." "Good thing indeed." They stood together, watching the celebration continue around them. Father and daughter, united by loss and love, and the slow accumulation of choices that had brought them here. 2 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Evan took the subway. It wasn't something he did often anymore. The foundation work usually required cars and drivers, meetings in offices scattered across the city. But today he had a meeting in Brooklyn, and something made him want to take the train, to remember where he'd come from, to touch base with the person he used to be. The station was crowded with morning commuters, the usual New York chaos of bodies in motion. Evan found a spot near the doors, holding the overhead rail, letting the familiar rhythm of the city wash over him. The train pulled into the station, and a fresh wave of passengers pushed their way on board. Among them was a woman who looked to be in her 30s, carrying a toddler on one hip and a bag of groceries on the other. She was clearly exhausted, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that came from juggling too many responsibilities with too few resources. No one offered her a seat. Evan watched for a moment, waiting to see if someone else would step up. But the commuters around him were absorbed in their phones, their newspapers, their own private worlds. No one seemed to notice the woman struggling to keep her balance as the train lurched into motion. He stood up. "Here," he said, gesturing to his seat. "Please." The woman looked at him with something like suspicion, the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust unexpected kindness. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. You need it more than I do." She hesitated for another moment, then sat down with a sigh of relief. Her toddler immediately settled against her chest, small fingers curling into the fabric of her shirt. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's very kind." Evan nodded and moved to a spot further down the car. He didn't think about it again. It was such a small thing, after all, the kind of choice that barely registered in the grand scheme of a life. But across the car, someone else had been watching. A young man in his 20s, dressed in the rumpled clothes of someone who had been working all night. He'd seen Evan give up his seat, seen the woman's gratitude, seen the small transaction of kindness that had passed between strangers. 3 stops later, an elderly man boarded the train. He moved slowly, hands trembling, clearly in need of a place to rest. The young man who had been watching looked around, saw that no one else was moving, and stood up. "Here," he said, echoing Evan's words from earlier. "Please." The elderly man took the seat with murmured thanks. The young man caught Evan's eye across the car and gave a small nod, an acknowledgement of something shared. Then the train arrived at his stop, and he was gone. Evan smiled to himself as the subway continued its journey through the city. That was how it worked, wasn't it? Not grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but small choices, accumulating slowly, rippling outward in ways you could never predict. A seat given to a stranger. A moment of kindness noticed by someone else. Another choice made. Another ripple set in motion. The train reached its stop, and Evan stepped out onto the platform. The Brooklyn meeting was waiting. Another day of foundation work. Another step in the long, slow process of building something better. But he felt lighter than he had in years. Something had shifted in that moment on the train, a reminder of why he'd started this journey in the first place. Not to become important or successful or even to heal from Sarah's death. Just to be the kind of person who helped when he could, who saw the people around him, really saw them, and responded with compassion. That had always been enough. It would always be enough. The meeting in Brooklyn went well. A new community center was launching, modeled on the programs they'd developed in Manhattan. New families would be served. New children would get opportunities they'd never had before. The work continued, as it always did. On his way home that evening, Evan stopped at the coffee shop near his apartment, Elena's, where he'd had that first real conversation with Claire all those years ago. The same café con leche, the same Dominican pastries, the same sense of a neighborhood that had watched him grow. He was sitting by the window when his phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Got into the summer engineering program at MIT, full scholarship. Can you believe it? He could believe it. He'd always believed in her. He texted back, proud of you. Always have been. Always will be. The response came immediately. Love you, Dad. Love you too. He put the phone down and looked out the window at the street. The sun was setting over Washington Heights, painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber. People walked by on the sidewalk, mothers with children, old men arguing about politics, teenagers laughing at jokes only they understood. His community, his home, the place where he'd rebuilt his life after it had fallen apart. 10 years ago, he'd been a man with nothing left to lose. Now he had everything, a daughter who was going to change the world, friendships that had survived every test, work that mattered, a sense of purpose that got him out of bed every morning. And it had all started with a seat on a subway train. A choice made without thinking, because helping was simply what you did. He finished his coffee and walked home through streets he'd known for a decade, thinking about kindness and legacy, and the strange, unpredictable paths that led people to each other. Maya was home when he got there. Her acceptance letter pulled up on her laptop, already researching everything she could find about the summer program. They have a rocket lab, she said without looking up. An actual lab where students build and launch rockets. Can you imagine? I can imagine. Evan sat down across from her, watching her face glow with excitement. Your mom would be so proud of you. I know. Maya finally looked up, her eyes bright. But so would you. You are proud, I mean, right? Prouder than I can say. Good, because I couldn't have done any of this without you. Without everything you taught me. I didn't teach you anything. You did this yourself. That's not true. Maya's voice was firm. You taught me the most important thing. You taught me that showing up matters, that helping people matters, that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. Evan felt tears threatening and blinked them back. When did you get so wise? I learned from watching you. All those years, every day, you showed me what it meant to be a good person, not a perfect person, just good. They sat together as the evening deepened, father and daughter, talking about the future and the past and all the moments in between. Eventually, Maya went to bed, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Evan stayed up later, sitting by the window, looking at the stars that his daughter wanted to reach. He thought about Sarah, as he often did in quiet moments. What would she make of all this? The foundation, the community work, the man he'd become. He liked to think she'd approve. He liked to think she'd see the through line from who he'd been to who he was now, the same instinct to help, just expressed on a larger scale. He thought about Claire, who was probably in her own apartment right now, working on plans for the foundation's next decade. She'd changed so much from the woman who had stepped onto that subway train. They both had. And he thought about all the people he'd never meet. The families helped by programs he'd helped design, the children educated by teachers the foundation had supported, the communities strengthened by resources they'd worked to provide. The ripples spreading outward, touching lives he couldn't see. That was the thing about kindness he'd learned. You couldn't control where it went. You could only start it moving and trust that it would find its way to the places that needed it most. A seat given to a stranger. a moment of connection in a crowded city, a choice made without expectation of reward, and years later, a world a little bit better than it had been before. The phone buzzed one more time before he went to bed. A text from Claire. Thinking about that subway ride today, strange how one small thing can change everything. Evan typed back, not strange. That's just how kindness works. It moves forward on its own. Moving forward, Claire responded. I like that. He did too, because that was the lesson, wasn't it? The thing he'd learned over 10 years of building something from nothing. You couldn't control the future. You couldn't guarantee outcomes. All you could do was make the choice in front of you, the right choice, the kind choice, and trust that it would matter. Sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes the ripples would fade before they reached anyone. But sometimes, a single moment of unexpected kindness would change everything. He'd learned that on a crowded subway train, giving his seat to a woman who needed it more than he did. He'd lived it every day since. And that, in the end, was enough. That was more than enough. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Cars and sirens and the million sounds of 8 million people living their lives. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more challenges to face, more choices to make. The foundation was expanding. Maya was growing up. The future was arriving whether anyone was ready for it or not. But tonight, in this moment, Evan Brooks was at peace. He had done his best. He had loved as fully as he knew how. He had built something that mattered, not alone but alongside people who had become his family. Sarah would be proud. Maya would be okay. The work would continue. And somewhere out there, on a subway train or a city bus or a crowded sidewalk, someone was giving up their seat for a stranger. Not because they expected anything in return. Not because anyone was watching. Just because it was the right thing to do. Just because that's what kindness looked like, moving forward on its own, changing the world one small choice at a time.